We can start, Janvi.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I, Janvi Rajesh Kolte, on behalf of Deccan Education Society's Kirti M. Dongurse College, welcome you all for one-day national level webinar on global order and India, challenges and choices, which has been organized jointly by IQAC and Department of Political Science. The world is going through a transition phase, and we are experiencing the rise of new powers and a decline of old. India has to navigate its path through it. There are various challenges, but there are ample opportunities as well. I'm also very happy to announce that along with some of the most eminent speakers, we are also joined by various students of international relations as well as PhD scholars. With that, I would first like to invite the Honorable Principal of our college, Dr. D.V. Pawar sir, to give his welcome address.
Thank you, Madam. Namaskar and good morning to one and all. A very warm welcome to all the dignitaries present here for the national webinar. Let me firstly thanks to all for sparing your valuable time and accepting our invitation to grace this occasion. I would like to give brief information about our Deccan Education Society. The Deccan Education Society, Pune, is one of the oldest and renowned educational institutions in India, with over 137 years of dedicated service to the nation in the field of education. Deccan Education Society was founded in 1884 by eminent national personalities like Lokhande Tilak and Gopal Ganesh Agarkar. The Deccan Education Society at present has 59 educational institutions from pre-primary stage to post-graduation and research levels in arts, science, commerce, management, nursing, physiotherapy, etc. Our alumni includes intellectual, industrialists, politicians, defense personnel, literatures, and sports persons of highest caliber who have rendered valuable service to the nation. Deccan Education Society started Kirti College in 1954 at Mumbai. Over the years, Kirti College has endeavored to cater to the needs of students coming from underprivileged and marginalized section of the Indian society. The college is affiliated to the University of Mumbai, and it possesses by the phalanx virtuous academicians and teachers who are engaged in pursuing Deccan Education Society's goal of knowledge is power. Presently, the college offers undergraduate programs in all the three faculties and postgraduate programs in arts, science faculty. The college integrates itself with the students' community by providing them with a solid platform to develop their co-curricular skill and also provide them with a solid platform to integrate academics with that of extracurricular activities. Such conciliatory disposition of the college has resulted in gaining popularity amongst the students' community and the stakeholders. College relentless service to the community, maintaining a standard of educational system and audacious working tradition has resulted in achieving NAAC's A grade thrice. I am personally very happy and excited to welcome all of you on this virtual platform. The theme of this webinar is very relevant, especially with the current changing dynamics of global world order. The political, economic, and social course of contemporary world order is undergoing consequential transformation as a result of paramount shift in nation-state relations. In the wake of greater turbulence resulted after the global pandemic, the center of gravity of world politics is undergoing definite alteration. The emergence of China as a preeminent global player is an important aspect of this alteration. The relationship between the nation states financial institutions, politics, society, business, and the market have significantly traversed by the emergence of new turbulent forces. India has now facing a new challenge to face these changing circumstances using all the potential strength. The pivotal question which comes into being is the role of India as a reckoning power in shaping the global order. In this light, the current webinar, jointly organized by IQAC and the Department of Political Science, is relevant and will shed light on the challenges faced by India's foreign policy at the global level. I invite all the dignitaries and well-known academicians who are here to share their reflections on a very important topic of global order and India. I hope the discussion will be very fruitful and develop an insight into the undercurrents that influences India's foreign policy. Thank you, and over to Janvi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for those encouraging words. Before moving towards the convener of this conference, I would like to very briefly mention that since we have shifted to online lectures since the pandemic, since past 1 year, the Department of Political Science from Kirti College has held various online programs. It has taken various initiatives where we have discussed many issues, whether it is the tribal issue or any other issue. And today's conference is not an exception to that. To give you a reflection and to tell you more about the theme of this conference, that is global order, I now invite the convener of this conference, Dr. Harshad Bhosle sir. Bhosle sir, can you just enlighten us on the theme of this conference?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Janvi.
Over to you, sir. Thank you.
The video is not starting. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Janvi. I am very happy to host all my friends. It's a great pleasure to see all my friends after a long time. And it's a very, very important occasion for Kirti College as well as for me personally, because all are very stalwarts, all are experts in their own field. And I'm very happy that Kirti College is organizing this webinar on a very, very relevant issue. So far as last 25 to 30 years is concerned, the period of last 2.5 decades have been very, very turbulent, because there have been several forces which have actually influenced the course of international relation and international politics. And the term which was quite what we can say famous till 90s was India is emerging power. India has potential, or India has been aspirational player. But in last 25 years, certainly the image of India has undergone tremendous change, where India has emerged as a global rather than an aspirational player. So India has overcome a lot of hindrances, especially the year 2020 had been very, very turbulent period, because it has battled with COVID-19 and Chinese aggression, and India entered this new year with new challenges. What are these challenges? We are going to discuss these challenges, and our scholars will be focusing on all these challenges. The first and most important challenge is strengthening ties with our neighbors. The most important challenge is to develop some kind of equilibrium or equilibrium balance between two major powers. India's proximity to United States of America is reflection on India-Russia relations. Again, India's relationship with European Union, Western Asian countries, and most importantly, Pakistan and its neighbors. So year 2021 presents India an opportunity to emerge as a very, very important power rather than aspirational player. So reflection of several events in last few decades, years show that India has overcome all these hurdles. And in coming years, India will really have a tough time to deal with several hurdles. So we have developed a new catchphrase, Emerging India. And Emerging India is, I think, the most popular leitmotif, informing a wide array of discourses among academicians and scholars, as well as policymakers and intelligentsia. The discourse which is going to take place will touch all these aspects. The almost predestined, though belated emergence of India as a global power has come to animate both scholarly analysis and popular commentaries. And most of these accounts of India as a new found glory in Committee of Nations allude to the attendant reorientation of India's foreign policy in post-liberalization era. I've just mentioned that there will be several challenges. In fact, China will be one of the major forces to reckon with, and that will be the great challenge how we deal with China. United Nations, especially our stake as an important member of United Nations Security Council, that will be a challenge. India's relationship with Russia, India's relations with US, and of course, India's relation with European Union. So all the scholars will be giving their expertise. All the scholars will be giving their own findings. They have their own understanding of various problems, which I have discussed a short while ago. I welcome all of them. And later on, to interrogate intellectually, we can ask them several questions. With this particular short introduction, I welcome all the dignitaries. I welcome all the students, scholars. And with this, I hand over the session to Janvi to please proceed further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. As sir has rightly said and told us the importance of global order and what role India is going to play. With that, I would now invite for the inaugural address Dr. Jabin Jacob. Before that, I would like to very briefly introduce him, but it's quite difficult to briefly introduce him or other speakers, given the kind of vast experience that they hold in their respective fields, but I'll still try to do my best. Dr. Jabin Jacob is an associate professor in Department of International Relations and Governance Studies at the Shiv Nadar University, Greater Noida, and an adjunct research fellow at the National Maritime Foundation, New Delhi. Sir is also a formal fellow and assistant director at Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi. His vast interests include Chinese domestic politics, China-South Asia relations, Sino-India border areas, Indian and Chinese worldviews, and center-province relations in China. Sir has also been associated with various journals like the China Report. He holds a PhD in Chinese Studies from the School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi, and he has spent his time as a student, researcher, and faculty at Taiwan, France, and Singapore. As a part of his research, he has traveled to various states and India's border countries. He has visited parts of India's disputed borders with China and Pakistan, as well as international borders like Myanmar and Bangladesh. Sir is a PhD supervisor at the Naval War College, Goa, and he is a regular speaker at various defense training institutes. He is the member of editorial boards for Review for Indian and Asian Studies, Institute for Indian and Southwest Asian Studies of the Vietnam Academy of Social Science, and the NMF journal Maritime Affairs. His latest publication includes a co-edited volume with Huang the An titled China's Search for National Rejuvenation, Domestic and Foreign Policies under Xi Jinping. Some of his work can also be found at https://indiaandchina.com, and he often tweets on various issues. Sir, with that, I welcome you to give the inaugural address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Janvi. Let me begin by thanking the Kirti M. Dongursi College and its IQAC and Department of Political Science for this invitation and high honor of giving the inaugural address, and for the opportunity to be part of the great and historic legacy of the Deccan Educational Society. My thanks especially to Dr. Harshad Bhosle and the organizing committee. It's also a pleasure to be part of this endeavor with colleagues in this conference, most of whom I've actually worked with and known for a very long time. Let me compliment the college and its authorities, as well as the students, for picking a topic that is going to be of considerable interest going forward for India. As the my bio was mentioning, I'm a China specialist, and so my approach to this question of the global order and India, the challenges and choices that India faces, will necessarily come from my understanding and my studies of China. So with those few initial remarks, let me begin by addressing first and foremost the question of what is a global order. This is something commonly known, of course, for any student of international relations, that this is a set of relations among actors in the international environment based on a body of rules, norms, and institutions. With the rise of China, each of these rules, norms, and institutions are under attack, directly or indirectly. What we call the global order has never actually been stable across its, expanse. Regional crises and hotspots have always existed. But with the rise of China, what is happening is that the largely stable pattern of relationships among states, that existed, until quite recently, which involved the respect for rules and norms, as well as the development of institutions that supported and propagated these rules and norms, is under challenge. But let us also remember that the international order was always a hierarchical one, where the US sits on the top and abrogates for itself the duty of being global policeman. Now, it is a fact that this was by and large accepted by most of the world, except those unfortunate few countries that failed to meet the norms and standards of the global world order. And this is particularly true after the end of the Cold War. And the US also, remember, quite often decided to ignore those rules when it suited its interests. It is not that China has a problem with such a global order, where one country is at the top and that this country determines the rules, enforces them as it sees fit, and takes on the prestigious task, let us say, of providing security to smaller countries, as well as the more onerous role of the punisher of those countries that dare to oppose the writ of the larger power. In fact, China very much likes what it sees in terms of the structure of international order. All that it wants to change is who is in charge of running the show, including the international organizations that support the United States at the top. It also wants to change those norms, democracy and civil rights, and some of the rules, such as blanket application of UNCLOS without reference to historical rights. It wants to change these so that its own particular interests, which are different from those of the United States, can be met. This began as realpolitik, pure and simple, and would have remained only secondarily as an ideological and cultural conflict between the US and China. And let us admit that today it's not just a realpolitik conflict or a contestation between the US and China, but there are very strong elements of the Cold War era ideological conflict, but also a new element, which is of the cultural and the civilizational element in this contestation or conflict between the United States and China. So if you look at the language of Chinese officials, when they talk to the United States, there is this reference to China's great historical past and China's divine right, as it were, to rule, to be at the top of the heap, as it were. So because of China's self-perception as a great civilization and historical great power, and let us leave aside the validity or relevance of these claims in the modern era for the moment, there is also the imperative for China to showcase itself as being different from the United States. And which is why many rules and norms are being challenged by the United States, by the Chinese. There is also the bigger imperative of the Communist Party of China wanting to retain power at all costs. Else, any political party ruling China could conceivably carry out the same tasks of challenging the United States-led international order. So it's important for us to remember that Chinese foreign policy is essentially the Communist Party of China's foreign policy. This needs to be underlined. And this is therefore, this kind of foreign policy is therefore very different in many ways from what we would normally understand as rational foreign policy behavior of countries. Because it is first and foremost the Communist Party of China that wants to protect its place in power in China, first and foremost, above and beyond the interests of protecting the image or dignity of the People's Republic of China, which the Communist Party of China rules. So therefore, we have such phenomena as wolf warrior diplomacy. We have the strange phenomena where diplomats who are supposed to protect the image of their country and government in host capitals are actually going hammer and tongs against host governments, criticizing host governments for objecting to or countering what they perceive as the Communist Party's interests, right? And this easy conflation of the Communist Party's interests with China's national interests. So here we have to acknowledge that this is the interest of a small ruling elite in the Chinese capital that are first and foremost important for China's diplomats. Now, of course, you could argue that all foreign policy, all government policy in a way is subservient to elite interests. But what I'd like to submit here is that China takes it to another level altogether, where it is almost without contest or opposition within China. And therefore, it becomes more and more obnoxious in many ways abroad. Now, in such a situation, what are India's challenges? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves, at this moment in time. Firstly, we talk within our foreign policy establishment as well as publicly about supporting a rules-based order internationally. But is it in fact a rules-based order? Or a G2 where both the US and China have very little room for maneuver, and both need to exhibit power and control, right? And it would appear that when push comes to shove, these two countries are willing to divide up the world and sort of decide that they will not face other challengers. Is this a situation that works for India? There are some rules that are already not in India's favor, even in the current international order. There are several rules that are not to India's liking. So what is the kind of world and commitment to that world that India is willing to make? What is India's own conception of a rules-based order? Is it entirely based on what the United States has determined? Or is it based on opposition pure and simple to whatever the Chinese will propose? For the moment, the Chinese alternative is a world in which might makes right and winners take all, because that is the basis on which the Chinese argue that they have right, that they are the second largest economy in the world, that they are the largest population in the world, that they are the largest trading partner for most countries in the world, that they are the biggest importers, they are the biggest exporters of multiple products and commodities that the rest of the world and rest of the world's economies depend on. And therefore, China is very much plugged into the system, and it is time to give China its due place, which the Communist Party feels that China has not received, right? Now, it is easy for us in India to conclude that India cannot live with this Chinese world order. But are we making this claim or jumping to this particular conclusion because of realpolitik factors or emotional factors? Our own sense of civilizational and historical greatness, and therefore, if China can be a great power, why not India, right? Why should China be a great power or be the world number one, and why not India? Fair question, an absolutely important question as well. Or is it because of racism against the Chinese? We have a tendency to believe that we are somehow special and somehow better than the Chinese, often ignoring the evidence of our eyes that China's economy is 4 or 5 times larger than India's, and that China's military is so much more capable than India's. All of these factors all of these hard facts are sometimes ignored in our quest to be considered on the same footing as the Chinese. And the Chinese often state this. Now, that is not the only basis of India's claim to a slice of the pudding, a slice of the pie, as it were, in the international order. India is also one of the world's largest, most populous countries. It cannot be the case that 1/5 or 1/6 of the global population is completely ignored and is not part of global decision-making structures such as the United Nations Security Council. But at the same time, we must also consider whether the churn and the flux that is being created by China in the international order can in fact be good for India. Whether an unstable world, of conflict between the United States and of tension between the United States and China actually offers more opportunities for India. Can India take a punt on being able to manage this instability? What then are India's choices? First and foremost, India needs to decide what kind of power it wants to be. All right. When I say India, this is a whole mix of actors. There's the government, there is the ordinary people, there are intellectual elites of a certain persuasion, there are business elites with a certain kind of interest, there are political elites with their own maybe narrow interests of retaining power at the elections, at the hustings every few years. So how in this mix of multiple and competing interests, perhaps contradicting interests, can India then decide what kind of power it needs to be? Does India want to be seen as law-abiding and responsible? Or does it want to achieve its interests even when these interests demand some kind of breaking of the rules, some kind of breaking of the norms? Can it do both? Can it retain a positive image of itself in the globe while reshaping and changing rules as it sees fit in its own interest? Let's be clear that neither the current world order led by the United States nor a putative future world order led by the Chinese will meet all of India's interests, right? So this then leads to the next question. Can India offer an alternative to both US hegemony and Chinese exceptionalism? This is often a question that is not raised in India. We are sort of easy to be seen in one camp or the other, even though we have a great tradition of being a non-aligned power and talking about strategic autonomy. What this actually means on the ground for the average Indian citizen, as opposed to what it means for the Indian state in the international order, is never explained. Because, how can India be different from the United States and China? The answer to these questions, is dependent on the answers to two other questions. What principles govern India's interests? Is it the Constitution of India? Or is it in an imagined past of glory, of cultural and civilizational glory, and also of victimhood at the hands of foreign invaders, quote unquote foreign invaders? And who determines India's interests? Is it the people? Is it the central government? Is it the states of India? I mean, remember, India is a federal republic. This is a reality that is often forgotten when it comes to the practice of Indian foreign policy. Or is it a dialogue among all these actors, right? What are the values that Indian people hold as dear to them? Does Indian society have the capacity to lead a global economic power, a global economic and political power that can offer a valid and legitimate choice to both China and the United States? Are the thinking, the mentalities, the rules by which Indian society operates today worthy of global leadership? How can that be the case when there is, caste and communal conflict in India? When there is inequality, economic as well as political and social inequality in India? So if India is going to be a leader, what is the kind of society that India will showcase as a model that the rest of the world feels comfortable in adopting? It's very easy for the rest of the world to oppose or to have worries about the United States model, because the United States record has been one of initiating conflict and then being unable to finish up or clean up its messes, right? Whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, I mean, just to talk about the post-Cold War phase. Then there is also this very sharp turns inwards, this inward-looking, navel-gazing attitude that the United States often swings to. This happened during the early 1920s, 30s, and it happens also under the Trump administration's Make America Great Again, where the United States is seen as in conflict with the rest of the world. The rest of the world also cannot accept Chinese model of international relations, or China at the top of the international hierarchy, because what is the model that the Chinese offer? The so-called Chinese dream offered by the Communist Party of China's leadership is a political and economic model where a small elite will govern the country and decide what is good and what is bad for the vast majority of the people. Is that the sort of world that other societies in the want to live under? And yet, if India wants to be a choice, what is the middle way, or what is the alternative to both the American and the Chinese path that India is offering? So coming to the practical and the immediate, which is how can India shape the global order? I will only talk of two aspects that are key and which we have consistently failed at in the past few years. One is economic policy. What is the kind of development model that India wants? How do we ensure a development model that caters to the most downtrodden and the socially backward and the socially ignored in Indian society? What is the kind of industrial policy, manufacturing policy that will take care of the interests of the least in Indian society, right? Why is it that farmers' agitations take place even in 21st century India? How are foreign economic relations for India going to be determined? India walked out of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership multilateral trading arrangement on the grounds that it did not take care of the interests of India's small and medium enterprises, its farmers, and so on. But is that also an excuse for keeping away the competition from India's giant public sector units, giant private sector corporates? In other words, is India running away from competition when that competition might perhaps help other sections of society? That's a question out there. There are no definite answers. It's certainly the government's approach has not made it clear what the answer is. The second issue is technology policy. In the 21st century world and for the years ahead, how is technology going to be used to govern India? Is technology going to be a tool for control and coercion? Is technology going to be instead a tool for reducing inequalities, right? We will not have many more vaccine diplomacy moments in the future. So the next question is, what is India's technological capacity that will allow India to showcase itself as a global leader? Finally, what is the impact of technology on India's security policy? Ultimately, you can have all these ambitions globally, but unless you are able to implement technology to achieve your security interests in the interest of fighting wars or preventing wars, you cannot actually be a global leader. And our experience of what went on at the LAC, the line of actual control with China last year, shows that while technology can be used in to a certain extent, the Indian Army sort of seems to rely still on a 20th century approach of throwing a mass of soldiers at a problem rather than trying to deal with this issue from a technological point of view. Where the Chinese say that they're going to be fighting a limited war under high-tech conditions, the Indian Army's military modernization reforms and doctrines still seem to be stuck in the past century. The use of technology and the impact of technology doesn't seem to be quite clear. Now, unless India gets all of these aspects, of course, among many others, economic policy and technology policy, as well as clarity about its values and interests clear, India cannot be offering an alternative to either China or the United States in the global order. And with those few words, let me conclude by stating finally, that a commitment to principles rather than rhetorical flourishes and posturing for the cameras is important. Foresight and preparation of not just the elites, but also of our entire population for global leadership is important. And the willingness to see opportunity and take risks. We might still be a developing economy, but the world is passing by us very quickly. We need to be able to implement multiple policies at the same time rather than working on things sequentially. Let me stop there. Thank you so much for your attention and this honor.
Thank you so much, Jacob sir. Thank you for enlightening us and sharing your reflections with all of us. Before moving to our next guest speaker, I would very quickly introduce you all with today's guest speakers. We have Dr. Mrudul Nire sir from University of Mumbai. We have Sumit Lokhande sir, who is a research associate at Dalian Maritime University, China. We have Professor Uma Purushottaman, Central University, Kerala. We have Praksha Chaitriman, SIS JNU, New Delhi. And we have Professor Arvind Yelleri, Peking University, China. A warm welcome to all the chief guests for today. I now proceed towards the chairperson of this webinar, that is Dr. Mrudul Nire sir, University of Mumbai. Dr. Mrudul Nire sir is associated with Department of Civics and Politics, Kalina University, graduated from SIES College, did his master's in Mumbai University. He started his teaching career with Ruia College, and he has also won prestigious Fulbright scholarship, after which he went on to USA. Dr. Nire is also the Director of Department of Students' Welfare. Dr. Nire sir. Nire sir.
Thank you so much.
A warm welcome to you.
Thank you. I mean, it's always a pleasure to come back to Kirti College for two reasons. The first reason being my very dear friend Harshit Bhosle. And the second very important thing is first of all, I mean, let me tell you all that I'm not a director now. I used to be director some time ago in the university. Now I'm just a professor in the Department of Civics and Politics. Well, it's always a pleasure to come back to Kirti College, of course for Harshad, and of course for my very dear friend, Principal Sir, D.V. Pawar Sir. He has always helped me whenever I was in the university on deputation, and was very close friend. Apart from that, of course, thank you, Meenal, and also Medha Dhapre Madam for inviting me for this particular national webinar. Well, I've been given a responsibility of chairing this session, and of course, meeting Jabin and Arvind is always a pleasure. I've been given this opportunity to chair this session. That makes my role even more easier, because when you're not an expert on a particular thing, you generally become a chairperson or chairman to chair a particular session, so that you don't have to talk much. But just to open some remarks, what I feel is, it is very important for us to prefer talk on some kind of theoretical perspectives when we talk about these international global systems and how they're becoming more and more dynamic. Well, Jabin was talking in his keynote address. He did speak about a lot of this kind of dynamism, what kind of dynamism would appear at some later stage, or what kind of work has been happening, and how a particular country, like say, for example, India, what India wants to be known as. So all of these kind of things, I mean, I'll just try to bring in, or I'll just try to get some scattered idea on these kind of things. Basically, when I look at this, I feel that the perception of international relations is actually situated in some kind of theoretical conceptions. And if you're talking about these theoretical conceptions, the first and foremost two important texts that we talk about are in international relations, which actually shaped the international theory, are E.H. Carr's The 20-Year Crisis, that was published in 1939, and Hans Morgenthau's book, The Politics Amongst Nations, in 1948. So basically, what do these texts do? I'll come to these, and then I'll come to the current situation. What do these texts do? These texts actually, give a broad framework of analysis of how the things, how the world unfolded, how things unfolded, and how do we perceive of these kind of things. Secondly, it also provides some kind of it also provides to the future analyst with some kind of theoretical tools for understanding general patterns underlying some kind of unique episodes in the global history. Third very important thing that these two texts give us is basically it reflects the form of political action which were most appropriate appropriate in a realm where the struggle for power was preeminent. So basically, the entire thing revolves around this. And now, when you look at both these scholars, what they try to do is they try to correct what they saw a deep misunderstanding about the nature of international politics lying at the heart of liberal project, especially the belief that struggle for power could be tamed by international laws, and the ideas that that the pursuit of self-interest could be replaced by some kind of shared objectives of promoting security and all those kind of things. So if you look at some of these things, you find that, are we really looking at the global order in this particular perspective? Do international laws, international conventions, covenants, are they really helping us to build this particular global society into a place where there is mutual coexistence? Just now my dear friend Jabin spoke at length about how India, China, and US are negotiating their spaces in order to gain some kind of importance globally, and so on and so forth. So in these contexts, when you have all of these new structures, or right from the old structures, maybe we can say, right from the United Nations to the new structures of Quad and G20 and G7 and ASEA and SCO, all of these kind of structures. What is the role that these particular structures are playing? These kind of things are very important for us to understand. If you look at some of the current trajectories of the global international politics, you'll find that there's a rise and fall of Arab Spring. We find that there is an accelerating crisis in Europe. You find Ukrainian crisis, and you find something to do with the rise of an Islamic State. Okay. Now, when you look at these things, what are very important? How do we look at, or what is the major concerns of some of these developments that I just spoke about in terms of rise and fall of Islamic State, rise of Islamic State, or rise and fall of Arab Spring? What is at the core of it? I basically look at things in a bit different perspective, and that is why what I would say is there is some kind of global instability that is coming in, and this particular global instability is basically due to some kind of systemic transition, or maybe we can say that there is a systemic crisis of capitalist global system. Okay, why I'm talking about these capitalist global system is, post-COVID, last 1 year, you've seen the kind of the states have given away their ideologies. In fact, if you look at maybe some of the liberal countries like the US or UK, some of the Scandinavian countries, I mean, they have devolved finances to such a level that whatever they used to talk about in earlier days in terms of economic accumulation and all of those kind of things, they have given away all those kind of things, and they are giving more money into the hands of people. I mean, in that sense, can we say that, I mean, there is some kind of change in the perception and ideology of the states? Okay, I mean, this is not concerning only maybe COVID, but then I'm just trying to say, I mean, just trying to work on some of these things where has there been a global insecurity? Has there been a systemic transition? That is what I'm actually looking at. And you need to also understand this particular global system will fall apart. In fact, it will go out of existence maybe in some time, because you find that there is a chaotic functioning. There is a chaotic functions are at the economy and the politics of everyday life. So it's becoming more and more chaotic. Now, what is the reason of this particular current system? The current system of which is based on high level consumption and high level capitalist capitalist global system. Okay, the basic problem is about the ceaseless accumulation of capital, and this particular ceaseless accumulation of capital for these particular systems is has to maintain or has to survive on something called as profits. Okay, and the problem at this point of time is that these global capitalist systems are not making profits for the simple reason is that the means of production that these people are talking about has gone up so very high. The means of productions have gone up so very high that it is absolutely difficult to, or there are no possibilities of effective demand that has I mean, the means of production is the cost of means of production is so very high, and the production pattern also is so very high that the consumption, it is not able to target the consumption in the sense you have a lot of it available, abundant commodities available, and because of which profits are not easily possible to make by these particular capitalist systems. I mean, if you look at if you look at that particular book Capital by Thomas Piketty, he says that, I mean, in last couple of years, since 1950 onwards up to now, if you look at the capital accumulation, if you look at the profits that have been made, it is not more than 1.1%, okay, by the global economies. Whereas if you go earlier, okay, prior to that, it will be 4 times more. Okay, those particular global profits were 4 times more than what we see at this particular point of time. The reason is the cost of production is increasing very high. Technological advancement are so very high that you find that there is a lot of capital accumulation, but then there are no buyers, and therefore profits are not being made. Now, there's a question as to what, I mean, if at all we have to talk about these particular system, what do we bring in? Now, this particular problem is very much akin to India also. Okay, we find that globally, globally we are talking about growth. Okay, that is what people are talking about. Yesterday, I was listening to some interview that was taken by Karan Thapar, and he said that economies should be gauged at every quarter, whereas in Indian economy is being gauged only after 1 year, where we say, okay, fine, GDP is at 5%, but every quarter if we look at the GDP, then we actually come to know as to what is the how the economies are doing. So when the entire world is talking about growth, I mean, is it really necessary that we need to talk about growth alone? Okay, there are some scholars who feel that it is not growth, but I think but according to them, it is employment that is very important, and employment not at the national level, but employment at the global level. That is what global level becomes very important. Now, the reason why you find that that employment levels are diminishing day by day, and you'll find that tomorrow the middle class white collar men will certainly have some other roles to play in the economy, because due to technology you find that a lot of people are out of the entire employment circuit, and this is where we need to bring in some kind of new things. Now, there is something called as speculation of death debt. At the same time, there are some people who are talking about speculation of debt versus progressive taxation. I mean, when it comes to progressive taxation, I'm talking in terms of Thomas Piketty. He has come up with something. I mean, of course, I mean, I don't agree with what he says, that there should be 90% income tax and so on and so forth, which at one given point of time, all these global economies have done. In fact, some global economies like Russia, Germany and France, these countries post-war period, they tried to increase the income tax to such an extent so that they can rebuild their economies, because we all know about one particular part of rebuilding economy, and that is, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, what we call as World Bank today. Okay, this was one of the catalyst force of developing or reconstructing these global economies, including US, UK, or all of those particular allied powers. But then at the same time, I mean, those countries which were out of this particular seed, they actually came in for progressive taxation, and they taxed the individuals so very high that it was not possible for them to do anything but progressively tax these particular people. So there is this particular debate between speculation debt versus progressive taxation. While Jabin was talking about US, as to what US actually is, where US is and how US is focusing itself, I mean, there are again some scholars who are of the opinion that US, the US hegemony is declining, and he has given a lot of reasons for this particular declining hegemony. First of all, they are of the opinion that in one of the world's most impressive military structures is that of the American military structure. Okay, that nobody can wage a war against US. Okay, and it has got one of the largest armies in the world, largest defense forces in the world. But unfortunately, that particular defense forces do not go on ground. I mean, this is what had happened during the Iraq War. That why should an American citizen go back to let's say Iraq and fight those wars? Okay, where at the same time, I mean, US cannot pursue other countries to go and fight war for themselves, for them. So in that case, what happens is the American presidency also do not know, as especially if supposing say these kind of warlike situations are there, what essentially is to be done. And therefore, I mean, having a strong military structure, but this particular military structure really of any use? These are some of the things that we need to look at. Coming on to something like trade, you find that there are a lot of preferential trade agreements that have been done between different countries. You find between Pacific countries and Atlantic countries, EU and United States, and all of those kind of things. But then, in 1991 and up to maybe in next 5 years or so, you heard about WTO so much. The all international relations scholars, I would like to go back and see whether WTO is really a relevant institution today, because will the national interest of these particular countries be given a primacy over the international conventions and covenants? These kind of things are essential to be thought of. Now, when you have this kind of a structure, okay, even Jabin, spoke about the same kind of structure. Like there are these kind of structures, and we need to work on these structures. But there are a lot of scholars who are of the opinion that this particular system will decay over a period of time, because it is a full-blown capitalist structure, and tomorrow you will find that this kind of system will wither away to some extent. Now, if that is the case, in that case, who should succeed, or what kind of systems will be succeeded by these kind of in coming times? Okay, or who will be the successors of these kind of systems? Okay, what will be the possible outcomes of these kind of systems also? Okay, the current systems. Now, theoretically speaking, there are basically two very important outcomes we can say. One is to create a non-capitalist system, Okay, but this will share those particular those particular worst kind of features of capitalism, where you will have some amount of exploitation, where there will be capitalist hierarchy, where there will be some kind of inequalities. These kind of things will be inherited by this particular structure, but the system should be or will be a non-capitalist system. Okay, can we now the question is, can we do this with other than markets? Okay, so I feel that tomorrow, when we are talking about these kind of new systems, we need to come up with these new systems with something called as it should be an egalitarian system and a relatively more democratic system. Okay, the point that I want to make here is, I mean, the question is, are our systems really democratic in that sense? So therefore, when I'm looking at these particular systems, or what is the fallout of these systems, I feel that once you do away with the capitalist system, or once you try to create some kind of non-capitalist systems, obviously there will be relatively more egalitarianism and there will be relatively more democratic systems. Okay, so then in that case, the historical debate that people are talking about right from the beginning of some kind of an invisible battle that is going on between determinism and free will. Okay, what kind of state systems do we want, and where do we want to bring in determinism? Where do we want to bring in a free will system? A free will system goes towards something called as horizontalism. Okay, and this particular horizontalism again becomes or should be brought in coming days. In fact, this particular pandemic in last 1 year or so has tried to restructure and recreate these particular systems. Okay, where they are not becoming more and more where these systems are somewhere becoming a little bit porous, and you find that people may have different kind of perspectives and attitudes towards looking at these particular systems also. We need to create a new system where we are trying to bring in a non-hierarchical structures in the global system also. Okay, and finding these particular new structures will replicate the advantage of privileged minorities. I mean, certainly, I mean, Jabin also said that in China you have few elite people and who are going to decide the fate of the country. And will the world actually accept these kind of people, or these kind of global elites who would determine what people should eat, what people should not eat? Okay, those kind of things. Or when he was trying to talk about China, probably, I mean, if I'm not wrong, this is what he's trying to hint at, that will these minority of global leaders who come from China, will they be accepted by the other countries? So the question is, I mean, as you know, a lot of post-Marxist thinkers say that people will not or leaders will remain where they are, because those people who are creating these new structures will become new leaders, will become new elites, and the privilege situation or the advantage of privilegism to these particular minorities will stay, but with a new kind of method, with some kind of new kind of method that will automatically come in. When you look at capital and ideology, you find that ideology is playing a transformational role to make the global systems a bit more egalitarian, and a lot of people have been talking on the same lines. In last 10 years or so, if you look at some of these international scholars, these international scholars are giving more importance to the equal society, egalitarian society, and a more democratic society, if we can bring in. Now, if you look at the international scenario, you find that there are new patterns, or rather not new patterns, but then we are trying to have along with all these strategy, along with all the wars that we are seeing, apart from this, we also have some kind of measures to build an egalitarian society somewhere. And therefore you have something like Millennium Development Goals, which are transformed into SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, okay, which which lay a lot of emphasis on, poverty, which lay a lot of emphasis on education, on social policy. These are some of the things that the global community is talking about. Not only that, but also we find that at one given point of time, people were talking about Human Development Index. Now people are talking about something like the multidimensional poverty index. That is, poverty is to be measured multidimensionally. It is not possible to measure only the human development. And finally, coming to my last thing, I mean, the last index is about the democracy index. Okay, you have the Economist Intelligence Unit, who are basically talking in terms of democracy index, and they're trying to classify these countries into different kind of categories. Okay, whether they're authoritarian regimes, whether they're pseudo democracies, and so on, so forth. What once upon a time Samuel Huntington actually tried to bring in that particular classification. Okay, so these kind of classifications coming in, probably, I mean, my the last thing that I would like to say is that, I mean, is it possible maybe in 20 years or so that the whole the capitalist system will undergo some kind of changes, and a new egalitarian democratic system may be thought of, or may be sought by majority of us? That's all. Thank you for inviting me. I hope I made some sense. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your views on global systems and nation states. I now welcome our next guest speaker, Sumit Lokhande, sir, who is going to enlighten us on India's foreign policy, a retrospective analysis. Before that, very briefly, let me introduce Professor Sumit Lokhande. Professor Sumit Lokhande has a very keen interest on India-China relations. A very pleasant coincidence is that Dr. Mrudul Nire and Dr. Jabin Jacob have been his guide, PhD guide and co-guide respectively. In 2016, through selection of Institute of China Studies, he received 1-year Chinese government scholarship to do linguistics in Shanghai International Studies University, Shanghai, China, where he studied Mandarin and did his PhD research. Again, in 2017, he received the prestigious Confucius China Study Fellowship in Shandong University, Jinan, China. While doing his PhD research, he has also worked on 2 independent projects along with Professor Yen Xiang Chang, if I've pronounced that rightly. First year, he worked on Belt and Road Initiatives, that is the BRI project. And his second year of research was focused on changing dynamics of India-China relations and its impact on geopolitics of the Indian Ocean. He has submitted his PhD thesis in August 2020 to University of Mumbai. He is currently working as an assistant professor and head of Department of Political Science at Ramshet Thakur College of Commerce and Science, Kharghar. Along with that, he is a research associate at School of Law, Dalian Maritime University, Dalian, China, and a visiting professor at School of Liberal Arts and Human Science, University, Oro, Surat, Gujarat. Welcome, Sumit, sir. Sumit Lokhande, sir.
Hello, I'm audible?
Over to you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So my topic is, before starting my topic, I would like to thank the organizers of today's webinar, Dr. Harshad Bhosle sir and his organizing team, for giving me this opportunity to express my views, my analysis of this very important topic that we are discussing today. My topic was, I was going to select some other topic, but then various topics or various parameters were already been selected. So I chose this topic particularly as it will sum up all other topics, or rather it will open up discussions for all other topics that are coming after this. So my topic is India-China, rather Indian foreign policy retrospective analysis. So as the title suggests, I will be putting forward a retrospective analysis of India's foreign policy as a topic. As we all know that India's foreign policy is a very vast topic. I have peculiarly divided into 4 parts. The first part is between 1947 and 62, the India-China War. The second is from 1963 to 1991. The third is from 1991 till 2010, and the last is from 2011 till present. So I would try to be as brief as possible while touching important events during this period. As we all know, the first Prime Minister of India, Nehru, was the torchbearer of India's foreign policy in the initial era. So during a session of interim government in September 1946, Nehru declared that India would develop an active role in world affairs, pursuing an independent policy compatible with our national interest. He further said that India could play a positive role in the stretch from Australia to New Zealand and East Africa, as it believed that as the first Asian and African country to have gained freedom, to adopt an uncommitted and influential stand on international issues. Nehru also felt that India should preserve her freedom to judge every international issue on its merit without any partisan biases. Nehru always tried to carve out a new rule for itself, and if possible, to play the role of bridge builder between the blocs, and thus promote world peace and international understanding during the non-alignment movement. Now, the initial 10 to 15 years of Indian foreign policy, it played an important role in maintaining rule-based world order. Its crucial role in Korean crisis, Congo crisis, Swiss crisis, Vietnam War are few testimonials of it. During this period, India genuinely believed in rule-based world order and had faith in international organizations, which was the reason why India took the Kashmir issue to United Nations, as it believed that United Nations would check the merits while making decisions. However, these policies of neutrality, non-alignment were not received well in the world, which was divided into two distinct blocs, and with NATO, Warsaw, SEATO, SANTO, and other alliances propping up every now and then, India was looked with suspicion by both the blocs. Now, the important conference that turned the tide against India or in favor of India, or made India realize how harsh the world was then, is the Bandung Conference. So Bandung Conference was a crucial juncture for newly independent Afro-Asian nations, and the conference resulted in varied developments for India. Though India and China reinforced the Pansachal Accord on Tibet issue, the drift between India and China relations opened up their fronts. Like India and China being among the largest country of the third world, both of them wanted to lead this bloc. For that matter, Nehru claiming the center stage at the conference did not go well with Zhou Enlai, as China felt it was sidelined by Nehru's stature as a globally renowned leader. Pakistan, on the other hand, was successfully able to assure China that their relations would remain intact and flourish regardless of Pakistan-USA relationship. Further, it also assured China that it would not involve in any aggressive policy against China and would stay neutral in the wake of war between them. At the end of Bandung Conference, where India and China clash of interests became visible, China and Pakistan relations moved ahead with confidence-building measures. We all know things went after. We all know where the things went after this. India faced defeat in 1962 war, and it was setback which was more striking than the advances India made before the 1962 war. India's prestige and influence started to decline in international sphere. The war brought India out of its notion of utopian world and sentimental approach and forced it to bring pragmatic changes in its foreign policy. The next one decade, India focused on developing its comprehensive national power while seeking benefits and grants from both the bloc. Later, after the Sino-Soviet split and rapprochement of Sino-US relations, the rising disturbance in East Pakistan forced India to alter its non-alignment policy and it entered into a friendship pact with USSR, which proved decisive in the 1972 Indo-Pak War. Now, during this period, India's presence at the world stage became more symbolic. Now, this era also taught India to make ad hoc policies as and when the situation demanded and suited its interest. However, by the end of this period, India found its economy in turmoil, political instability, And finally, with the collapse of USSR, it had to readjust itself to the new realities of a unipolar world. In 1991, India went ahead with LPG as its domestic economic was unsustainable and its reserve dried up. Now, this era opened up new chapters for India with some amount of economic gain. It started initiating some bold foreign policy decisions. As we witnessed the economic rise of Asian tigers, Narasimha Rao launched the Lucas policy to develop economic and strategic relations with Southeast Asian nations. It tried to redevelop its relations with Russia, initiated rapprochement with China with series of agreements, and the Gujarat Doctrine was introduced to redevelop its relation with neighboring countries. Most importantly, despite of international pressure, India stood its ground and refused to sign CTBT. And not only that, it became a nuclear armed state. Though the 1998 nuclear bomb blast again invited sanctions from the West, however, this time India had emerged as a major developing country with a big market. And as a result, all these sanctions were revoked in the next 1 or 2 years. Further, it ended the decade with victory in the Kargil War and entered the next decade with high morale. The decade of 2000 was very important for India for many reasons. Firstly, it started a cooperative relation with USA in which USA cajoled India in defense cooperation. India-US signed GSOMIA in 2002, which was the first of the 4 foundational military agreements between India and US. Secondly, it was the closest where India and China reached to settle the border dispute during the Vajpayee's 2003 visit in China. Next important notion was the 2006 Indo-US nuclear deal, which gave India a backdoor entry in the nuclear trade market without signing CTBT. In the same decade, India's GDP growth started nearing double digits, which helped it to escape the adverse effect of 2008-2009 global financial crisis. With the rising economic power, India became member of various multilateral international organizations. Similarly, in the same decade, it also published its naval doctrine and started developing relations with littoral states in Indian Ocean. Many small countries started looking up at India as an alternative to China. As China started developing its relations with Indian neighboring states, India too started developing its relations with neighboring states of China. In the same decade, also saw rapprochement between India and Pakistan. The 2003 Ceasefire Agreement was a success. Trains, buses, service were reinitiated. However, the number of terrorist attacks started increasing during this period. And finally, after the 2009 Mumbai terrorist attack, they reached a stalemate as India declared that terror and talks can't go hand in hand. At the same time, this decade also gave rise to China, which overtook Japan as the world's second largest economic power. And with its increased economic power, it gave up Deng's idea of hide your strength and bide your time, as it started asserting its presence in the regions and areas that it had claimed since 1950s. Despite of this, India and China celebrated 2010 as a year of friendship and pledged to deepen their cooperation. There were various assumptions that India will become the third largest economy in the next 10 to 15 years, and India entered the next decade with a lot of aspirations. However, the economic slowdown of 2012 and exposure of series of camps by then government stopped the government to take any concrete measures, which set the stage for the arrival of Narendra Modi as the Prime Minister of India. During his initial years of his first term, he put forward a policy of cooperation and appeasement. He invited heads of all the SAARC nations during his swearing-in ceremony. Even after the Pathankot terror strike, India invited Pakistani officers to investigate and collect the evidence. However, even this goodwill gesture did not bring any positive effects. And the relationship between India and Pakistan reached a stalemate. Further, there were political issues between India and Nepal, through which India blocked the trade with Nepal, and a bit of relations were deteriorated with Nepal during that. Further, this era, in this decade, China successfully developed economic close ties with all the neighboring countries in India. Further, the Doklam incident took place between India and China, and though the situation was diffused diplomatically, India also signed LEMOA and COMCASA with USA in 2016 and 2018, respectively, to send a signal to China. Though India is an open critic of BRI, it had maintained a policy of appeasing China or not making her angry till recently. To give an example, we can recall India staying absent during the UN resolution on human rights issue in China. Even with the Quad, India was initially hesitant to name China as direct threat to the Quad. However, after the May 2020 incident, it seems that India has given up this policy of appeasing China and has become an active member in the Quad. However, now we really enter in the era of uncertainties, where India has to balance its cross-cutting relations across adverse countries. Now the question comes, what is India and how it's going to deal with present situation where it has to deal with a rising China, where it has to deal with an USA who wants to preserve its place, where it has to deal with Russia, which has been facing Western sanctions and is going closer and closer to China. And while doing this, India also has to maintain its aspiration to be a global power. As Jabin sir rightly said that it's the economy that will put meat on the bone of foreign policy aspirations of India and will help it compete with China. But there are certain preconditions for it. How to become an economic superpower in an era where China has already utilized whatever development, whatever economic rise, whatever economic development had in last 20 years. So what are the preconditions for that? The most important precondition was, or rather is, that India needs to develop trade relations. Now, why India needs to develop trade relations? Because for last 30, 40 years, when India was an inward-looking country, trade-wise inward-looking country, China developed its trade relations, strong trade relations with European countries as well as North American countries. So today, if India wants to become a trade surplus country, or India wants to become a manufacturing hub, it needs to export. And how it will export? It will export only if it has close trade relations or close trade lines of communication. Next important problem here is the cost of manufacturing in India is comparatively highest among all the developing countries. Second, the quality that India provides, or if it wishes to be a manufacturing hub, it will have to provide a quality as par with China, and it has to sell its good at comparatively less or comparatively cheaper than China. And for that, it has to make drastic economic changes, resettlement and reconstruction all over India. Are we ready for that? That's the question. Now, the model that the current government or that India is adopted will definitely not make India the next China. So any scholar who has studied China will say that whatever China has reached today, a major role was played by Chinese PSUs, public sector units. The investment that public sector units have done all over the world brings in money and gives jobs to Chinese laborers in China. That's the reason why the whole BRI concept was brought in by China. When 2008 economic crisis hit China, it transformed, it started transitioning itself from manufacturing industry to service sector, as well as infrastructure industry. And that's why since 2011 till now, China has invested heavily in infrastructure, and not only in its own country, but abroad. So said that if India sells up its or disinvests its PSUs. How it's going to fund the development, the fast, not just development, the fast development that India wishes to bring in its own country. Obviously, only the taxes are not going to help to bring this development. India will require, or India will need the current Navratnas and will also need to develop more PSUs. If not PSUs, India will have to develop public-private partnership where government gets an equal share in the profit so that it can invest that profit back to the development of the downtrodden, back to the development of small-scale industries, etc., etc. That I come to end of my presentation. I would like to thank once again Asher sir for giving me this opportunity to express my views on India's foreign policy retrospective analysis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lokhande sir. I now welcome our next guest speaker for today, that is Uma Purushothaman ma'am. Very briefly, I would like to introduce ma'am. Dr. Uma Purushottamam is currently Associate Assistant Professor at Department of International Relations and Politics, Central University of Kerala. She was earlier a research fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, New Delhi. She was awarded a PhD in International Studies from School of International Studies, JNU, New Delhi. She also holds a master's degree in international studies from JNU and a bachelor's degree in English language and literature from the University of Kerala. An alumnus of JNU, she has worked with United Services Institution of India, USI, and SAGE publications. Her core areas of interest are US foreign policy, domestic policies, great power politics, international relations, American studies, where she focuses majorly on soft power, great powers in Indo-Pacific, and politics of Middle East. Along with this, ma'am has also authored and written in several international journals. To name her few books, Trends in Russia-China Relations, Implications for India, Globalization and Identity, etc. Ma'am, I now hand over the mic to you. And along with that, ma'am is going to enlighten us on negotiating India-Russia relations in a multipolar world. Over to you, ma'am. Uma, ma'am.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that very generous introduction. First, let me thank Dr. Harsha Bonsle for inviting me to speak at this conference. It's always good to see some old friends like Dr. Jabin and Dr. Arvind here, albeit virtually. So I'll be speaking on negotiating India-Russia relations in a multipolar world. And I thought instead of doing the usual rigmarole of looking at history and looking at the bilateral relations, I thought I would look at the points of convergences and divergences between India and Russia, Russia's core interests, and then see how these will play out in a multipolar world. Though I'll very, very briefly touch on the bilateral relationship as well. So I thought I'd take this lecture forward by posing and trying to answer a couple of questions. The first is, of course, something which I think the various speakers, and particularly the chair, has already spoken about are we moving towards or are we already in a multipolar world? The Russians, of course, prefer to use the term polycentric instead of using the word multipolar because they say, multipolarity does not reflect the interconnections and complexities of a globalized world. I think the term polycentric also conceals the fact that the rising powers or the emerging powers are still willing to work with the Western shaped world economic system. Scholarly opinion is, of course, divided on the question of the current situation in the world, and there are people who argue that the United States will remain the sole superpower for some more time. Others say no, we are moving towards bipolarity. In fact, Fareed Zakaria, in his recent book about the post-pandemic world, says that we are moving towards bipolarity, and he argues that the United States remains the #1 nation by far. And he says that the distinguishing feature of any bipolar system is that the two top powers are miles ahead of all the others. And that certainly seems to be true of the United States and China right now. Yet other scholars would say we're moving very fast towards a multipolar world, pointing to the re-emergence of several of these countries, including India, Russia, Brazil, Turkey, so a host of countries. As an Indian, of course, I'm inclined to believe and hope that we are moving towards a multipolar world order, because that's probably the only way India will be able to play a significant role in the world. But I would not rule out the possibility of this kind of multipolarity eventually coalescing into bipolarity after a few decades. But for now, we seem to be moving towards multipolarity. But obviously, I mean, from all the signs, it would seem that none of these poles are going to be equal. So it's going to be a kind of differentiated multipolarity, if you can term it as such. And every one of these rising powers will be regional powers, and they will have a decisive say in how things are going to work out in their own respective regions. The second question that I wanted to answer is how have we reached this situation of multipolarity? This is primarily because of the relative decline of the United States and the rise of the West. Between 91 to the global financial crisis in 2008, we witnessed a period of relatively unchallenged American dominance, with the United States being called a hyperpower. It faced what Charles Prothomov famously described as its unipolar moment, where there was absolutely no challenge to its actions, and you had the United States working across the world with impunity, acting like a global policeman. But the period of US dominance has ended now, and this is very, very obvious. I mean, US misadventures in Afghanistan, Iraq led to a kind of imperial overstretch. The financial crisis of 2008 confirmed the end of US predominance. And of course, under Trump, there was this acceleration of the fall of dominance of America, because he completely diluted American credibility across the world. And the thing is that other countries really do not trust the United States anymore, because they feel that next time there's a presidential election, US foreign policy could completely change. So the challenge to US preponderance is coming from the rising powers and from the non-state actors. And most importantly, the domestic crisis in the United States has contributed to the declining status of the United States. And as recent election showed us, American polity and society is deeply, deeply polarized. You have very high inequality in the United States. 0.1% make over 196 times the income of the bottom 90%. Racial divide persists. Large numbers of people do not have basic health insurance. And if you look at the pandemic, the United States has handled the COVID-19 pandemic much worse than any other major country. Over 515,000 people have already died of COVID-19 in the United States. And as Fareed Zakaria again says, that COVID-19 did not just accelerate talk about the American decline, it did so in the context of already global concerns about the rise of China. And people started comparing America's decaying infrastructure to China's gleaming cities, and then how ineffectual Washington's response was to the pandemic as against Beijing's taming of the disease. I mean, using whatever measures, we might have problems with how Beijing tamed the disease, but certainly they seem to be much more effective than what Washington was doing. So where do India and Russia stand in this kind of multipolar world? Russia is shaken off its dependence, foreign policy dependence of the 1990s. It is now beginning to reassert itself, and you can actually see the kind of confidence on display in Russia's intervention in Syria and before that in Ukraine. And Russia's interventions really prove its ability to project power and to alter the balance of power even far away from its shores. And through its actions in Syria, Russia has broken the post-Cold War monopoly that the Americans had on the use of force. And they've staged a spectacular geopolitical comeback in the region. So Russia has been able to shore up its ally, the Assad regime, against ISIS, while securing for itself a seat at the high table of peace negotiations, and secured its airbase at Latakia and the port at Tartus. India is the third largest economy in PPP terms. It is a de facto nuclear power. It has the world's third largest armed forces, great deal of soft power. And if you look at the concept of the multipolar world, both Moscow and New Delhi support the multipolar world. as they feel they would become much more influential at the global high table. And they both feel, that US unipolarity would be inimical to their own great power goals and interests. And Kenneth Walls has warned that the international system would be much more unstable in conditions of multipolarity. And if you look at Wallerstein, he also suggests that a multipolar world with 8 to 10 relatively autonomous geopolitical centers will be chaotic and unsustainable. So in such circumstances, no one multipolar center can flourish in isolation or ignore the other center. So each one will have to try and maintain and improve relations with other centers. And this is where the relation between India and Russia becomes important. Sorry. In trying to get relative advantage, each center in the multipolar world will have to decide which alliance to go for and what their primary interests are. And Wallerstein suggests that all centers will seek to maintain relatively good relations with all other centers. India and Russia therefore need to strengthen relations, not only because they can build on their years of trust and working together, but also because they face similar challenges and have converging interests. And given this seemingly incipient multipolarity, what are Russia's and India's, which are historically, culturally, and geographically distant? What are their core interests in this multipolarity? Is there any convergence in their interests? And this is what I attempt to answer over the next few minutes. Just to very briefly touch on the bilateral relationship, if you go back in history, 1962, the USSR did not support China in the India-China war. Then you have the Friendship Treaty in 1971, where you have the USSR sending groups of cruisers, destroyers, submarine armed with nuclear missiles from Vladivostok against the USS 7th Fleet. You have very, very strong defense relations. 60 to 70% of our weapons are of Russian origin. Russia remains the only country which has been willing to lease us a nuclear submarine. We have promised to buy S-400 missile defense system despite the threat of American sanctions. We are collaborating on joint production of weapons like the BrahMos missile system. Then we have the licensed production in India of Su-30 aircraft, T-90 tanks. We are planning to jointly manufacture AK-203 rifles. There is cooperation in space. There is cooperation in the civil nuclear field. The weakness remains the trade relations, which is only about 10 billion, though there are plans to reach about $30 billion by 2025. And then there is, of course, this maritime corridor, which has been proposed between Chennai and Vladivostok, which will hopefully increase India's economic involvement in the Russian Far East. India's extended 1 billion line of credit to the Russian Far East. And then at the multilateral level, we are engaged in many, many platforms like the SCO, BRICS, RIC. And on the holy grail of Indian foreign policy, which is to get a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, Russia is, of course, supportive of India. Other than the bilateral, I think we need to look at some of their core interests and see if they converge. Look, the core interest for both Russia and China and India is really economic growth. The Russian economy is slowing down now. There is a structural weakness in the economy, and then there is the impending demographic crisis in Russia. And it's believed that without corrective action, the Russian population could shrink to 130 million by 2050. So Russia needs to reinvent and revive its economy, and this has to be a priority if it wants to remain a major power. It needs technology to diversify and strengthen its economy. Sustained economic growth is a priority for India as well. India is the third largest economy in PPP terms, one of the fastest growing economies. India needs to grow at very, very high rates for a sustained period if it needs to meet the challenges like urbanization, providing jobs to youngsters who are entering the job market, providing access to health, building infrastructure, lifting millions of people out of poverty. So it needs huge investments and technology for this. As of now, it would appear there is little that Russia or India could contribute to each other's endeavors to build their economies. However, Russia's interest in the Make in India campaign is reflected in its willingness to build helicopters in India. So it opens up many interesting possibilities. Another interesting option would be if India could sell skilled or semi-skilled labor to Russia to mitigate some of the effects of the demographic crisis. However, for this to happen, Russia will have to overcome its historic aversion to foreigners. The second is on the neighborhood. One of Russia's core interests is to secure its territory, ensuring that external powers do not make inroads into regions which it perceives to be in its sphere of influence, particularly Central Asia, for instance. So Moscow's and New Delhi's interests converge in Central Asia in two ways. Both of them want a stable region which is free of religious extremism. Neither of them want the region to be dominated by China. India, on its part, is quite comfortable with Russia being the primary power in Central Asia. And we seem to be comfortable with dealing with the regimes in Central Asia, even if they are not necessarily democratic. India also realizes the importance of Iran in connecting Central Asia and Russia to India. So they have, both of them have economic and strategic interests in developing ties with Iran. Russia sees South Asia as a region where India must remain dominant, and India clearly sees South Asia as being part of its sphere of influence, where it can be at the fulcrum of all economic activity. At this point, it seems unlikely that Russia is willing to develop any inclinations to supplant India's primacy in the region, despite not inviting India for the Afghan talks. West Asia, again, a region where both countries have vital interests. The Russians are back in West Asia. India, of course, has its own interests in West Asia, but you know, at one level, both of them do not want. They want a stable West Asia. India, of course, is dependent on West Asia for oil and gas, and the number of Indians who are working there, sending back so much money back for India's foreign exchange reserves. So given its interest in the region and the face of US rebalance to the Indo-Pacific and the shale revolution in the United States, in the years ahead, India will have to play a more robust role in West Asia. And since their interests converge, Russia is unlikely to oppose any Indian contribution to maintaining stability and balance in the region. India could also make use of Russia's ability to project power in the region if India itself is unable to do so. However, India has to first decide what kind of player it wants to be in West Asia, and if it's willing to share the burden of providing security in the region and deal with the accompanying risks. Terrorism, again, both countries are victims of terrorism, so there are even more reasons for them to work together. Russia is worried about the spread of Islamic radicalism from West Asia to Central Asia and the Caucasus. India, of course, was identified as a threat by the IS, for instance. India is also worried about its own citizens being threatened by terrorists in West Asia. So there is immense convergence of several core interests between Russia and India, but there are some issues which could come in the way of India and Russia, collaborating also. One is, of course, the dragon in the room, China. China remains an important partner for both countries, not only because we both share very long borders with China, but Russia has resolved border disputes with China, but the India-China border disputes remains very live. Actually, the rejection by the West has kind of pushed Russia into closer embrace with China. And Russia sees China as the biggest, potentially the biggest consumer of its energy resources and its biggest trading partners. Chinese investments in Russia are growing, though not at the pace that the Russians wanted. Again, Russia's closeness to Beijing is also propelled by fear of a duopoly or a G2 between Washington and Beijing. So while some experts are talking about Russia-China alliance, I mean, if you look at the recent meeting between the Chinese and the Russian foreign ministers, it would seem that this is something on the cards, but then I still kind of remain skeptical about any long-term alliance between the two countries. For India, on the other hand, China will remain a competitor, if not a rival. Both are economies, growing economies with great power ambitions. China would like India to remain a regional power and limited to the continent. So while India would be interested in circumscribing China's influence overall, Russia is unlikely to openly kind of join this kind of effort. And while containing China's influence might be in Russia's interest, Russia's problems with the West are currently an even bigger threat for Russia. So Russia might help China in countering the West if conflicts between Russia and the West continues. For China too, if tensions in its relations with the United States prevails, the West will remain the primary competitor. So if Russia's relations with China develops into an alliance or a long-term strategic partnership, it could come in the way of Indo-Russian relations. However, if China's rise becomes belligerent, if it threatens Russia on its national interests in Central Asia, Vietnam, the Far East, then there could be distancing between Russia and China. And there's even the possibility of Russia collaborating with other countries to contain China's rise. The second is divergences on the United States. Both countries see relations with the United States to be the most important bilateral relations. US and Russia have had a very, very uneasy relation, have had very uneasy relationship since the end of the Cold War. Russia feels it's not being given the due recognition as a great power. It's worried about the US intervening in its neighborhood through color revolutions. But the breaking point was arguably 2014 over the Ukraine crisis and the annexation of Crimea. Then the US and Russia have dissimilar approaches towards the Arab Spring, which culminated in the Syrian crisis, where the Russians supported the Assad regime. And despite this, I think at the heart of it all, I think the Russians, while they resent the US-led order, they still want better relations with Washington, perhaps because the ultimate stamp of authority for its desire to be accepted as a great power can only come from Washington. Also, they realize that they need to work together on terrorism and Afghanistan, for instance. I'm not going into the reasons for the upgrade in India-US relations. I mean, there is affinity of values, the Indian diaspora, US technology, and then, of course, China. The US sees India as a great market, and India also knows that the US will remain the predominant power. We can discuss this in the question and answer session, for instance. Maybe. As for US-Russia relations, while India would like to see an improvement in their ties, because this would actually give India more flexibility in foreign policy choices, whether it is in the neighborhood or globally. Russia, however, sees India's improved ties with the United States as weakening its own position in India's worldview, particularly because India has been buying more weapons from the Americans at Russia's expense. The US, on its part, views strong Russia-India relations as part of a coalition trying to upstage the United States as the lone superpower. Finally, you have the vexed question of Pakistan. Our relations with the nature of our relations with Pakistan do not need repetition. Russia has consistently supported India's position on Kashmir. It's used the veto supporting India at the Security Council several times. You have the 1971 war. And India has repaid its debt in full, and it is continuing to buy Russian arms. However, Russia's recent rapprochement with Pakistan, which is driven primarily because of concerns about Afghanistan, has ruffled feathers in India. And at the same time, India's relations with Pakistan have seen a slide. So the approach to Pakistan has become a point of contention between New Delhi and Moscow. So from what you have understood from what I was saying so far, India and Russia will have areas of cooperation as well as divergence in the future. And this is reflective of the new world where countries will have cooperating and competing interests. So India will have to choose its partners based on the principle of horses for courses. In some areas, collaborating with one country might bring it greater benefits than collaborating with another country. So India has to build a coalitions of interest in different areas to solve different problems. There is a danger, however, if India is being seen as being too close to Russia, and particularly because of the estrangement between the Russians and the West. So any partnership between India and Russia could be seen as an anti-Western partnership, and neither India nor Russia can really afford to alienate the West. So Russia's primary aims are to promote advanced productive technology inside its borders, and it can make while augmenting its own military strength. And the best way for it to reach these objectives is through deals with the West, particularly Europe, rather than with India. However, given the current estrangement from the West, this seems unlikely. Therefore, there is an opportunity for India to strengthen its ties with Russia. And in doing so, it could even reduce, if only marginally, Russia's gravitation towards China. India's primary objective in the years ahead will be to pull millions of people out of poverty, provide employment to its youth. It needs to build infrastructure and set up industries and investments. And for this, again, investments can only come from either the West or China. And China does not seem to be a viable option right now. So Moscow and Delhi will have to play a delicate balancing role and pursue the path of multi-alignments by placing the Russia-India partnership at the inner circle of their foreign policies. I think I'll end here. Thank you for listening patiently.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us on this particular issue. I now welcome our next guest for today, that is Praksha Chaitriman. Very briefly, I take this opportunity to introduce her. Chaitri ma'am has done her graduation in political science, economics and philosophy. She has completed her MA in political science with specialization in international relations. Ma'am has also done her MPhil from Center for European Studies. Along with that, she is pursuing her PhD in EU, that is European Union and China Strategic Partnership. Ma'am has authored various books as well as presented papers in national as well as international conference. She has worked as an assistant editor at Dorling Kindersley for a period of 3 months, worked as a research assistant at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. She is also a guest lecturer at the Department of Political Science, St. Joseph's College, North Point, Darjeeling, junior researcher at the EU-India think tanks Twining Initiatives, research assistant and head of publications unit at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. Ma'am, warmly welcome you. And ma'am is going to enlighten us on India-EU strategic partnership and the challenges. Yes, over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Holi celebrations have just begun downstairs, so there might be a few disturbances.
No problem.
Is this fine though?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you, Janvi. And a very good afternoon to everyone. I'm very grateful to the organizing committee for hosting this very interesting webinar. It is indeed a pleasure to be a part of a webinar with two of my mentors, Dr. Jabin and Dr. Arvind. And of course, I also have known Dr. Mridul, who is in chair today. I'd also like to thank Dr. Harshad and Dr. Pawar for your warm welcome and opening remarks. I will be speaking on EU-China strategic partnership and the challenges that they currently face. At the outset, I'd like to mention that my presentation will broadly focus on EU and India as strategic partners. And as this is a partnership driven mostly by economic and commercial ties, a major section of my presentation will be on their economic relationship with a special focus on the ongoing EU-India FTA negotiations. Well, India's relations with Europe goes a long way, as historically, these two regions shared a vibrant trade relationship, which involved European powers traveling to India and making it one of the most important centers of trade, especially for powers such as the British, Dutch, Portuguese, and the French. Though this dynamic changed a little when, with the establishment of colonial relationship between India and Britain, Europe's importance to India as a significant trade partner remained intact. And recognizing this importance, India became one of the first countries to establish diplomatic relations with the European Economic Community in the 1950s, when Europe embarked on its journey towards integration. Since the establishment of diplomatic ties, India and EU have reached various milestones, but their relationship has remained predominantly economic in nature, especially in the initial years. For example, in 1973, India became the first non-associate member developing country to sign a commercial cooperation agreement with the EEC. Again, in 1981, India and the EEC signed a commercial and economic cooperation agreement. And in 1992, European and Indian industries established a joint business forum to promote trade and investment. Currently, EU and India's engagement is based on the 1994 EU-India Cooperation Agreement. The EU's engagements with India is also assisted with its enhanced interest towards Asia, which is popularized in the form of a document called Towards a New Asia Strategy, which was published in 1994. The main thrust of this document was economics as well. India was mentioned in terms of poverty alleviation and development. Arguably, in 1994, EU did not consider India to be a strategically important actor. So the trend of this economic partnership has continued even today, and even in the 21st century, trade is the driving force between EU and India relations. The EU is India's largest trading partner, accounting for almost 80 billion euros worth of trade in goods, and it is the second largest destination for Indian exports. Trade in goods between EU and India has increased by over 72% in the last decade, and trade in services is increasing rapidly as well. Currently, there are around 6,000 European companies present in India, providing 1.7 billion jobs directly and indirectly around 5 billion jobs in a broad range of sectors. As can be seen on the screen, some of the European brands are highly popular in India, L'Oreal or Adidas. However, relations for a long period of time, the two sides have not been able to fully capitalize on their commonalities and strengths, surprisingly not even in the economic relations. So usually when one talks about EU-India partnership, whether it is statements given by diplomats or official documents or academic literature, more often than not, it mostly begins with a rather long paragraph on how EU and India are both unions of diversity, that they share values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights, and are equally keen on preserving the rules-based international order and multilateralism. They are even described as natural partners, but a close analysis of EU-India strategic partnership shows that it lacks concrete elements. The best example of this would be the inability of EU and India to conclude a free trade agreement, officially called the Broad-Based Bilateral Trade Investment Agreement, BTIA, the negotiations for which has been going on for more than 12 years. Negotiations for this free trade agreement between EU and India was launched in 2007, but soon after the initial enthusiasm, the momentum was lost, and by 2009, and by 2014, the negotiations were completely suspended. The primary reason for the failure of negotiation was cited by both sides as differences in areas such as market access for key items, issues regarding intellectual property regimes, dispute settlement mechanism, and legal practices, amongst other challenges. Though the reasons cited above are correct, the actual reason why this agreement, and as a matter of fact, any concrete agreement between EU and India have not come through is because of many underlying and deep-rooted problems that aren't usually discussed in India and EU context. In order to understand these deep-rooted problems, it is imperative to first understand the nature of relationship that EU and India shares. EU and India are strategic partners since 2004. Now, strategic partnership as a concept in international relations is quite tricky, mostly because it does not have a definite definition. The term strategic partnership entered international relations lexicon in the 1990s and has been used as a popular tool of post-Cold War international relations widely. Broadly, strategic partnerships are all-encompassing foreign policy priorities, which can include partnership in a vast number of areas like trade, energy, environment, good governance, and many others. Academically, though, not many IR theorists have explicitly defined strategic partnership. And honestly, one of the best definitions of and understanding of strategic partnership comes from Jonathan Holslag, who is a Brussels-based professor of international relations. He states that strategic partnerships are what states make of it, and this could not be more true. Every state has their own understanding of the term, and even the same country with different strategic partners have different versions of strategic partnership. For example, India is a strategic partner with Russia, US, EU, China, and many others, but it shares different equations with each of these countries. Now, EU's understanding of strategic partnership is a little different. For the EU, the concept of strategic partnership is actually rooted in its broader narrative of EU as a strategic actor. The European Security Strategy, published in 2003, was the first document to mention strategic partnership as a tool of foreign policy. But the European Security Strategy document did not mention any priorities or goals for its strategic partner or list down the EU strategic partners. From the list of EU strategic partners that we can collect, it is clear that one of the important rationales behind the formation of strategic partnership for the EU is to address the emergence of new powers while attempting to strengthen its own image as an actor adopting to multipolarity. Similarly, India has its own understanding of the term. India's currently has more than 35 strategic partners. Strategic partnership, according to India's MEA, is a partnership that enables an expansion of policy choices and development options. According to Kanwal Sibal, former Foreign Secretary, strategic partnerships are a declarative instrument of policy, an effort to underline its commitment to build a long-term relationship by deepening ties to promote convergences in external policies and issues of mutual interest. As for the reason why India and EU upgraded their relationship to strategic partnership in 2004, there are two main factors. First was the rapidly increasing trade figures in the 80s and the 90s. The second reason was the changing geopolitics after the Cold War. With the liberalization of India's economy in the 1990s and the nuclear tests that it conducted in 1998, India set a new course to its political as well as economic growth as an emerging power. Meanwhile, the EU was itself going through several fundamental transitions, leading to the European Union in 1992, which transformed the earlier European community to an entity with far stronger institutions. Therefore, broad political developments at the global level and a heightened sense of actorness in both EU and India in the 1990s laid the foundation for the relationship to grow into a strategic partnership. Though strategic partnership has served as an important tool to exchange India-EU ties to enhance India-EU ties in a number of areas through institutional mechanisms such as annual summits, dialogues, EU-India strategic partnership is still lagging behind and unable to form a genuine partnership due to several challenges. The first and the most important challenge would be the difference in India and EU's levels of socioeconomic development and their different geopolitical priorities. Now, though both EU and India believe in democracy, when it comes to structures of global governance, India is, as an emerging power, argues in favor of a more democratic, unable to formulate a common position on issues such as enlargement of the UN Security Council due to internal differences. While the EU acknowledges the need to restructure international institutions and give more voice and seats to emerging powers, it expects the newcomers to co-opt in a largely Western-dominated system. This is the point that Dr. Jabin also mentioned in his keynote address, and even Dr. Mridul. So in the words of Ambassador Sham Saran, the existing architecture is sought to be retained even while accommodating new players. Ambassador Saran explains this in a more simpler way, saying that more tenants are allowed to occupy the building, but the landlord who sets the rules remains the same. Now, because of these fundamental differences, the EU and India have not been able to deliver as much as they potentially can. On the EU side, the problems that they list for doing business in India includes the following. One of the biggest complaints from European businessmen doing business in India is that India's progress in aligning its trade practices with international trade practices has been very slow, as a result of which it is difficult. The difficulty level in conducting trade in India is more than any other Asian countries. Most European businessmen also point out that India has protectionist practices in industrial policy formulations for a wide range of fields. Another problem is that in India, there is a tendency to apply local content requirements, which is problematic for many industries. Local content requirement means that before a business is allowed to run, it is made mandatory for it to use local products. The other problems that are listed by European businessmen would be haphazard custom checks. When it comes to getting products through customs, Indian officers are known to request for certificates of conformity to specifications that are different from those recognized at the international level. Most of the time, the final word on these rules and regulations are often left to the customs officers' interpretations, which is again problematic for many businessmen. EU businessmen from the European Union also are concerned about India's overall economic performance and stability, while many others are concerned about the political uncertainty when it comes to economic reforms. Apart from these problems, they list corruption and infrastructure bottlenecks as other significant irritants in carrying out business in India. In the last decade, India has seen quite a few number of high-profile corruption cases, such as the coal block allocation scam, Tata truck scandal, Railgate, Commonwealth scam, and the Adarsh housing scam, which caused heavy losses. With regards to infrastructure, European companies complain that they have to take extra measures to ensure machinery is not broken down due to blackouts and voltage changes. Now, coming back to the specific problems in EU-India FTA negotiations, many of the problems again center on European standards. For instance, one of the issues flagged by Indian businessmen, Indian companies find it difficult to access European markets due to the rising non-tariff barriers in the form of technical regulations, phytosanitary measures, industrial standards, conformity assessments, or barriers to service exports. Another area of friction is the EU's proposal to set up an investor-state dispute settlement mechanism. This is not compatible with the current Indian laws, as it will allow EU investors to challenge the government in front of an international tribunal. EU also wants India to liberalize accountancy and legal services. This is controversial as India does not want to allow foreign lawyers and accountants to practice in India. In terms of mobility as well, EU does not have a common working visa system, which restricts free movement of an Indian professional across EU nations. India is seeking a permanent resolution to these issues through negotiations. Now, in terms of looking at the way forward, while both the sides have become exasperated with the lengthy negotiations lasting more than 12 years, the recent EU-India summit, which was held online in July, has nudged the conversation on FTA once again. This communication, titled EU-India Strategic Partnership Roadmap to 2025, also shows that both the sides are keen on taking their economic relations forward. Although EU-India trade and investment relations are going smooth without an FTA, India has to realize that this is indeed the age of trade blocs and it cannot keep walking out of trade agreements like it did with RCEP. India has strong trade ties with EU and US, mostly because of the complementary nature of goods traded with the EU and US. But when the rest of the world is moving towards joining blocs, depending on complementarity alone might not be a very good idea. Both sides need to realize that the longer it takes to complete the agreement, the more complex things are going to get. As Dr. Mridul earlier mentioned, that people have now started questioning even the WTO's significance. So in the last few years, we have seen more WTO issues have been brought up, and negotiations, especially on trade, has become more complex. And skilled laborer and technology has changed the way business is conducted overall. Now, since negotiations on EU and India FTA might take time, overall India-EU ties should not be held hostage to the developments in the FTA negotiations. There are many other ways that trade and investment flows between the two can be boosted. In terms of a way forwards, there are other suggestions. India should make rigorous efforts to come to a solution to outstanding issues through dialogue. Efforts must be made to make the EU understand issues related to market access and visa. Even without the FTA, European businesses are still keen on investing in India. However, when it comes to problem solving, what India currently offers is these little fast track windows where foreign investors can approach for help. India has to realize that this mechanism is not enough and that they need to provide a proper channel to guarantee problem solving. Apart from trade, there are other areas where EU and India can potentially come together, and both need to realize this. EU and India needs to first understand the EU and its shortcomings before deciding on the agenda for cooperation. For instance, EU as a group of 27 sovereign states will not be able to deliver when it comes to issues like counterterrorism. Therefore, this is something that India should take up with individual member states instead of EU as a whole. In a similar fashion, there are many areas where it is better to approach EU as a union. For example, in case of digitization and climate change, these are two very significant developments in the last few years. So India needs to be prepared to join hands with the EU, and as these are areas that one cannot afford to lag behind in the coming years. In terms of climate change, the EU is likely to introduce some form of carbon tariffs soon, which will impact heavy industries like steel industries. And India should be in a position to be prepared for this, as well as willing to incorporate such changes. Similarly, when it comes to urban development, urban development is another area mentioned recently in the EU-China Roadmap 2025 that has serious potential for cooperation. Now, in conclusion, I'd like to mention that the India-EU strategic partnership has facilitated under widening and deepening of dialogue beyond trade and commerce. Engaging as strategic partners has enabled both to sensitize one another with each other's expectations and perspectives. However, despite a long decade of strategic partnership, the two sides have not been able to transform shared values and shared interests. But it is important to understand that the lack of deliverables is not unique to EU-India strategic partnership alone. In fact, it is typical of most of EU strategic partners because of its internal problems in the EU. There have been examples, when it comes to the way forward, there have been many examples where two very unlikely partners have committed to some of the most ambitious agreements. A case in point would be EU-China Comprehensive Investment Agreement, which was concluded after 36 rounds of lengthy negotiations amidst a global pandemic. Therefore, the successful conclusion of EU-India FTA and a genuine strategic partnership is possible as long as both sides are keen and willing to take relations forward, which they are, as seen from the EU-India Roadmap 2025. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening us. I now call upon the final guest speaker for today's webinar, and that is Professor Arvind Yelleri. In a very brief introduction, Professor Yelleri is a Senior Research Fellow, Associate Professor grade at HSBC Business School, Peking University, Beijing, Shenzhen, visiting faculty at Fudan School of Management, Shanghai, and Indian Institute of Management, Shillong. He is also the Adjunct Fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. He is formerly an Associate Fellow and Assistant Director at Institute of Chinese Studies, India. And he has co-edited a book called Tailspin, The Politics of India-China Economic Relations. Sir is going to brief us on India and China, the challenges and choices. Professor Yelleri?
Yeah, thank you, Janvi.
Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm audible to every one of you. So let me know if I lose or I just blip. Holy celebrations everywhere, despite government saying don't celebrate it publicly. Praksha was just mentioning about the celebrations. So happy Holi to every one of you. And let me first thank you, the Kirti College for inviting and organizing this wonderful webinar. Yes, of course, a big thanks to Harshit for bringing all of us together here and asking every one of us to speak something which is helpful or related to India's foreign policy. I think originally Jabin was supposed to say something specifically on India-China. and then I was pitched in to say something on India-China. I will try to give justice to the topic and speak about India-China relations from a larger canvas. And I think hopefully I have about 20-25 minutes at my disposal to speak about. We have heard Uma speaking about India-Russia, Mridul elaborating about the global state system, Sumit bringing and talking about retrospectively what has so far happened in India's foreign policy making and where it is cruising ahead. And it gives you a perspective that it's quite a turbulent time, especially in past 1.5 years, when India actually had to face some disillusionment on the Eastern front, disillusionment on the Western front. So it was a new wake-up call for Indian policymakers to look at foreign policy making from a fresh perspective, not from a new narrative or a new angle or new strategies, from fresh perspective, whether or not these problems can be set or can be met conclusively. With respect to China, all the presentations and all of my friends, co-panelists have touched China so far. So it is something which none of us can ignore. And it's a fact that China has emerged so comprehensively that it influences India's foreign policy beyond Asia and beyond this region globally. Whether that is geostrategy, whether that is geoeconomics, China stands a challenge to India. And that was one of the reasons why me and Mridul co-edited the book called Tailspin, because this tailspin is continuing in the history and is going to continue in the future as well. And China picks up more force to meet its challenges, and whoever comes to threaten it, right from their own people, right from their own strategy thinkers or intelligence or civil society, or the external forces. By the way, one more smaller note here, I'm though Chinese government pays salary to me, my views are very objective, and request PKU and request every one of you not to take it that I'm speaking against China or otherwise. To start with, we had a Galvan clash last year, middle of the last year. And the Galvan clash comes amidst the deepening crisis in bilateral relations over last decade. You will see that in last decade and so, India and China have been going through a turmoil in their bilateral relations on many fronts. So that includes stalled boundary talks, a widening trade deficit, the clash of national interests in the region, and Chinese opposition to India's global aspirations have together strained Sino-Indian relationship, and that canvas is pretty large. We have seen such antagonism emerging not only in physical terms, but in terms of ideas, in terms of ideation as well. And this is expanding. And Galvan was the last straw. I would say that it really exposed the limitations which the Beijing and Delhi were trying to hide from each other. I mean, at least in public domain, they were trying to say that all is well and we are moving towards a certain direction, which was not the correct in its full form. In fact, Beijing and Delhi are finally acknowledging the deeply problematic nature of relationship after what happened in Galvan last year in 2017 Doklam. And this public admission of trouble is a welcome departure, as I feel personally, from the entrenched habit of sweeping differences under the carpet and masking problems with the grandiose rhetoric of building new Asian sanctuary. And even there are papers, dialogues, speeches of referring to civilizational brotherhood and linkages between the two countries. That's all fine, but it is necessary that such conflict exposed the grand rhetoric between the whole debate about the Asian century or promoting multipolar world. India has been most of the time build the common Asian goals, how can cooperate in larger scheme of things, and both these demographic countries come together and come forward to look for prosperity, not only for the region, for the globe as well. So taking that discussion forward, what I have decided is the challenges and the choices I would categorize into broad areas. One is the political challenges, where I think my emphasis is only on the political challenges. Approximately about 85–90% of my talk is centered around these political challenges, and maybe in there I would try to wind up speaking about the economic challenges or the challenges which are non-political in nature. Now, let me start with the boundary dispute or the territorial aggressions. Now, since this is a macro deliberations, I'm not going to speak about the kilometers length heights of the lakes and mountains over here, but in general, the narration or the problems where problems lie between China as far as the boundary problems are concerned. Let me start with some examples or metaphors over here. A few years back, Jakarta claimed that it doesn't have any territorial dispute with Beijing in South China Sea. We heard about it, and when the international ruling came as far as the territorial waters with regard to Philippines and China was concerned, Duterte, took a U-turn and started negotiating and talking to China on bilateral forms. Sometimes we have spoken, leaders talking about, we do have territorial disputes or we do not have territorial disputes. Now, let me take example of what Jakarta was saying and how that is, or that can be taken an example in Delhi's case. When somebody says, a country says that they do not have a territorial dispute or a bilateral dispute, a boundary dispute, it says the story in two forms. One, that means that we do not have a tolerance to the competing claims. That means that we assume that whatever our boundaries, whatever the territorial limits which we operate within are non-contested. And that's one way of looking at it. When somebody says that there is no territorial dispute, the other spectrum, the extreme spectrum of this thought is that whether there are differences, but those can be settled. So there is a tone of compromise. But when you try to look at the tone or the nature of problems, the boundary problems between India and China, it has a different nature altogether. In all these three cases, Philippines, Jakarta, and Indian cases, since we're talking in the case of India and China, as I want to quote Sri Rajamohan, what he said is that you may not want to quote trouble, but trouble has a way of knocking at your door, right? And especially when it involves great power. So no matter, please refer to in my introduction, I just said that we had this habit of sweeping across the differences under the carpet, saying that no, we are moving towards a direction. But remember, this is not something which is going to solve. And let me refer to what Jabin mentioned in his speech, and also consecutively Mridul was talking about. There has to be relative conclusiveness, the way you formulate your foreign policy, making the way you formulate your ideas and narration, then those are relative in terms. You cannot live in a cocoon, say that my boundaries are safe and been guarded well, so I need not to worry about it. Remember the Aesop's fable, about a wolf and the lamb mudding the waters, and the lamb protests that it was only drinking downstream and did not, of course, stop the wolf from eating it up. So that brings us to mere realities that what is the situation at the boundary? Those are unsettled. LAC, we're talking about line of actual control are even not demarcated, and that puts us into a very precarious situation. Remember, the special representative talks, which was instituted between the two countries, was instituted to find a solution to a long-standing boundary dispute. But the negotiation and the boundary dispute were stalled many years ago. So there is no activism. Even if there is an activism, it is running at a very peaceful manner. And over the period of time, the SR have been focusing, these special representative talks have been focusing on maintaining peace, tranquility at the border. The SR set up multiple mechanisms to maintain peace and tranquility, but stabilizing the border has become hard as the frequency and intensity of the incidents have grown. And I can give you one example of 2007 Doklam standoff. The standoff was one of the examples, where both both sides were saying that the problems have been discussed and in all forms, in all formats. But I think this problem re-emerged when Doklam happened. So actually, one would see that post Doklam, when then the Foreign Minister Sushma Swaraj, External Minister of India Sushma Swaraj and Wang Yi met, the two sides noted that the developments in Doklam, which severely tested bilateral relations in 2017, are proceeding towards some peaceful resolution. And if those peaceful resolutions are not met, the Doklam would have been turned into a disaster spot. But nobody could stop what happened in 2020. It had to happen because these problems, the boundary problems, have been have a reason in the deepened distrust. The distrust which is mounting between the two sides. And the real challenge for Delhi, as far as the boundary problem is concerned, is in managing China's expansive territorial dispute with its neighbor, and then is to redress the growing power imbalance with China. So you remember that the Chinese the boundary dispute with India, or with regard specifically with the sketching the LSAs, is not only about, or is not reflected only in physical forms, but in other forms as well, right? Rising pressures, the way China tries to help India's neighbors to wage terrorist acts and other forms of confrontations with regard to India. And specifically speaking about the boundary problem, if learning from the Doklam standoff, or learning from the Galwan crisis or Galwan casualties, if India learns anything significantly, that means that India would come out of this confrontation with the head high. And I think the present round of discussions which are happening are proceeding towards give an impression that India has a resolute mind to make Beijing know that it is in a situation where it is trying to decouple from Beijing. It is trying to redraw its relationship with China. So boundary forms a core component of India's relationship with China. Now, I want to take another issue going forward, that is the bilateral political asymmetries and expectations. Now, when we talk about boundary disputes, it is not only about the legacy of history, it also pertains to the long-standing asymmetries or assumptions between the two sides, especially on the Chinese sides. And as China has grown, or its economic might has increased past 4 decades, and so you would see that its strategic posture has also changed, from keeping a low profile and biding time to striving for achievements. I would not use the Chinese terminologies over here, but one can see that how Chinese foreign policy has become more vocal, more assertive. And you would see those vocalities or those assertions coming on forefront in different forms. One of the forms you can notice is definitely the boundary clashes with India, but yes, the grand plans of China's Belt and Road, the way it has been running. And then China says that it is drafting its foreign policy based on consultative terms. I think that there are certain paradoxes the way Chinese look into the term called consultative methods or multipolar methods to engage with the rest of the world. And I think the Chinese are trying to keep those things aside, but try to give an impression to the global community that whatever they are achieving, try to forge ahead is purely consultative, bilateral, or maybe complementary to all the sides. But in the end, the Chinese have been trying to be opportunist and exploit the programs in their interest. I see these political asymmetries been rising in number and in its nature as far as India-China relations are concerned. For example, I can give you that when China talks about law, when China talks about governance, when China talks about rules, conventions, histories, treaties, it always follows a very dichotomous or very dual mindset to pursue those. And this has been exposed at multiple times. When China deals with the United States, when China deals with Japan, when China deals with Southeast Asian neighbors, is different the way China deals with India. And anyway, sometimes Indians are fond of ceremonial talks, standing next to big stones, nice gardens, and China knows that how to take benefit of that, how to distract the Indian interest and how to ride high on their own self-interest. But post Galvin, the gloves are off, and the tensions between India and China have have come on forefront, and these bilateral political asymmetries and expectations are going to play a major role in deciding the course of Indo-China relations in coming future. The third important point, as far as the political challenges and choices are concerned, those are with regard to China in South Asia, and the so-called strategic encirclement. I would not use the string of pearls. Try to use more academic, more fashionable term like strategic encirclement. This strategic encirclement with China has been engaged in South Asia are in two forms. One is in physical form and one is in optical form. Physical form, we all know, to start with CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, where China has been building a huge program, giving billions of dollars to Pakistan to invest in its infrastructure. Definitely a welcome measure for Pakistan. Maybe Pakistan can make better use of it and try to get out of its tribe mentality and maybe try to look at it from constructive form. But that's not happening. The important area of contention with regard to CPEC was the infrastructure projects which are running through POK. And that has been raised by the Indian side to Chinese in different forms. But CPEC is only one manifestation of the strategic encirclement in physical forms. We have also seen that the Chinese have been doing this about taking up the similar projects in Sri Lanka, have been taking up similar projects in Bangladesh, or taking up similar projects in Nepal. So all this signify the manifestation that how Chinese are seamlessly taking the strategic encirclement to worry or create confusion for the Indian strategic thinkers. And going forward, I also spoke about the optics. Well, I spoke about the how the narration the Chinese are trying to build, or Chinese are trying to build around the strategic encirclement. And let me take an example over here of the case of terrorism. We all of us know about the Maulana Masood Azhar's case in United Nations, and how China was supporting about Pakistan, and China trying to shy away from recognizing Pakistan's act of terror. Importantly, if I take one more example, the dual approach to sovereignty and intervention by Chinese, and want to expose it back in better way. A few years back in 2018, when Israel was bombing and trying to reorganize its military acts in Gaza Strip and claim its claim over Gaza Strip. I mean, in 2020 January, it was a Trump administration which recognized the peace deal and accepted Israel's claim over many disputed land. China was the one country which came forward and says that this is, a terrible injustice. The spokesperson used the word a terrible injustice. The terrible injustice underlined that China is not recognizing any such infringement of a territorial integrity of a Palestinian state or something which is under dispute, and confronted US, confronted Israel over it. But when it comes to POK, when it comes to Jammu and Kashmir, China has a different stance. So this is dichotomy. This is something which I want to bring forward in our debate and say that this is optical strategic encirclement China has been creating in South Asia. And that has been a worry for Indian policymakers for past few years. Taking it forward, a major part of my political challenges and choices to deal with China comprises with the great power rivalry and India-China. We have heard about the India-Russia relationship. We have also spoke about the India-EU relationship. Now, let's put the perspective on how India-China relations are getting complex with regard to the great power rivalry. If you remember, in 2012, the ball of great rivalry, great power rivalry started rolling out at accelerated pace in Asia, with the then US President Barack Obama formally announcing the so-called pivot to Asia that involved rebalancing America's global military weight to Asia, right? And this new US strategy called for deploying about most of American naval forces in Asia, approximately about 60% in next coming decade. Maybe Quad and Indo-Pacific are the next step towards this. And then strengthening its traditional alliance in the region and building new partnerships, including with India. Had we have an opportunity to hear Rohan, he would have explored this thing, in much more details. But we can take this thing in question and answers. So, referring to this pivot to Asia and the broader policies, why US wanted to come into the region in Asia, in South Asia, this was something significant for India, which opened India a rare opportunity to shape Asian balance of power. And the real danger of being drawn into conflict between the world's foremost power and rising challenger. Remember, I was talking about how China was trying to create imbalance in South Asia and larger Asia in China's favor. But with the pivot to Asia and with such great power rivalry and strategies, suddenly there were opportunities. A window of opportunity was open in India's favor. And the pivot is not just in military terms. I mean, though it may look, when I mentioned about concentration of military power, concentration of traditional tactics, dealing the region was concerned or was proposed by the United States, but it was not necessarily or limited to the military strategy. It was also complemented in a more active American economic and political engagement with Asia. We saw Obama embark on the first American presidential visit to Myanmar and Cambodia at the end of 2012, if you can remember that. Although the Obama administration insisted that the pivot is directed at Asia, Beijing, the Chinese were quite convinced that the new policy is about preventing it from reclaiming its rightful place as a preeminent power in Asia. And China, which we saw in 2012 and 13 onwards, had a leadership change, remained unfazed by the American pivot and signaled its determination to strengthen its own military capability and readiness to face up to potential confrontation with the United States. Meanwhile, the Americans declared that India is or will remain a linchpin of its new Asian strategy and urged Delhi to take larger leadership role in Asia. And I think you would see the similar steps in this regard was again followed by Trump. Oh, Trump was little inconsistent, but the larger policies of Trump was trying to use India to fire at Beijing and make Beijing create more anxiety for Beijing. Many countries in the East, I mean, I'm not just talking about the American interest in India or the Pivot to Asia program, which was trying to ascertain Western domination in Asia vis-a-vis China, but also, on the other hand, the East and Southeast Asian countries or Asia, the continent, part of the continent, wants India to be or to do more in providing security to a smaller states and promoting a stable regional balance of power. One can refer also the recent volume which Dr. Jacob had brought out, The Chinese Rejuvenation, and also before that he published one more book on India, China, Vietnam. One can refer that book to look into the granular discussion about how this expectation is rising among East and Southeast Asian nations towards India, and how India is expected to play a major role in these emerging calculations or sequences. Beijing, meanwhile, would like to prevent Delhi from aligning with Washington, and in teasing India, was teasing India with promise of stronger relationship. Remember Wuhan? Not for pandemic, Wuhan 1 and Wuhan 2. We know Wuhan more fascinatingly, more lovingly for pandemic and other things. But we have conveniently forgotten Wuhan 1 and Wuhan 2, the so-called informal discussions, and which the Indian side and Chinese held together. But I would say that it was a kind of China teasing India, lure away from aligning with Washington and telling that we both are equal partners. Why you're running away to US side? Don't listen to them. Please come. We will create a new age of shared prosperity and common destiny, so on and so forth. Delhi. Let me come to the end part of my political discussion and great power rivalry over here. Delhi, unlike the other Asian capitals, was little bit surprised with the turn of events, which started taking place after 2008. Suddenly, the Chinese growth dropped. 2007 was something when China President Xi was literally promoted from the Zhejiang province to come to the Politburo, and then slowly his rise, as vice president, and then the president, and then the chairman, and then the chairman of military affairs, and all those things. But these rapid turn of events, which created opportunity for Delhi, rather I would say in my personal capacity, Delhi was little unprepared to cope with these strategic consequences of China's rise and America's response to it. Okay, it was willing that it should play a decisive role, but it was not really sure about how these equations is playing. You can see such apprehensions through number of examples like Quad. I have already given this example of the informal summits, but those were the examples usually explains how India was given this opportunity, or is given the opportunity, and is mulling over, or maybe looks more apprehensive than thinking, sort of thing. India is willing to believe that the rise of China will most likely not be peaceful, and it should not bet on it, and it should, otherwise, bet on the small nations, small countries, small regions, pocket of regions, where it can socialize as a rising power, a regional power at least, not superpower. And in response to that, the benefit the Delhi sees in the great power rivalry is beyond what it had expected ever. in its in its books. India also is deeply uncomfortable with the Western Asian impress of China in the past, and finds itself in a very different quandary as relations between China and America begin to deteriorate. Remember that the love and hate relationship between West and West and America has been sometimes uh, short lived. It was the Western powers which crossed the fences and went and forged relationship with China. Remember 1971 rapprochement between the United States and the China. So as a result of it, you would say that the great power rivalry is trying to tweak or change the levers of confrontation, political confrontation between India and China. Now, my next point if I have enough points in about 5 minutes, if I can take Janvi, the multilateral and global governance. This is one aspect I am a bit apprehensive because I think India has put forward its will, as we have heard Uma was saying about Russia is in favor of India's role and claim over UNSC expansion and India's claim over its seat in the UNSC. The China has been non-committal. And apart from that, if you look, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the BRICS, it was the BRICS countries which coming together, having their own banks. It looks quite impossible for India to comprehend or to shake off the pressure that China has created at multilateral forums also. Mridul was referring about WTO, whether it really exists or it is non-existent, because you would see that the multilateral organizations have been taken over by the Chinese, and their influence is growing more strongly. With that, I would like to go to the next part of my presentation, which I want to just discuss not at length, but slightly. Those are broadly economic issues. India started its economic relations, full-fledged economic relations, post Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China, and it really flourished after 2000. When China started removing tariffs with regard to its entry into WTO. And there were opportunities for China to globalize and India to connect with the global economies. And China started interacting with India in more commercial terms. But what we have is we have a growing trade deficit with China. And we have the domestic market being threatened by the Chinese product. Yesterday's news, India has levied the anti-dumping duties on a kind of a plastic product, plastic raw material coming from China. So we have banned that. That's the latest news yesterday. So you would see that there are more threats because India is not yet at all mature manufacturing country or economy, and most of its manufacturing are in its nascent stage, in its developing stage. That means that most of these smaller, medium enterprises are trying to feed into the whole ecosystem of manufacturing in India. That is why Made in India, that is why Atmanirbhar, and so on and so forth. There are many things you would hear from the present regime they're talking about to reinforce and try to solidify India's economic capacities to deal with the Chinese threat. Now, that's what we have in the bilateral on the bilateral form. But the larger context one needs to understand: the Chinese rise and its threat to India is not only the bilateral, is not only in the regional context, but it has a global context to that. The whole gravity of international political economy has been challenged by the China's economic rise. Let me refer to one incident over here. Last year, August 3rd, approximately 16 US senators along with the then Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and Defense Secretary James Mattis. They expressed concerns to the IMF. They wrote a letter and says that most of the countries which are the signatory or the subscribed members of the BRI scheme of things are applying to IMF for loans, for financial assistance. And as per the report, most of these countries which are seeking financial assistance from IMF have been indebted in connection with China's sprawling infrastructure program, BRI I'm referring to. So that means that most of the funds which have been distributed by IMF are going to the countries which are using those funds, those capital to pay back Chinese, right? On the other hand, the Chinese have been trying to break the US monopoly in the IMF voting share, okay? In terms of voting share, US has not indomitable, impregnable dominance in IMF, approximately 55% of voting share it covers, it controls. And as a result of it, you would see that the rise of China is trying to break some of the institutions. I'm not going to talk about the validity of IMF over here, but I'm just talking in terms of institution, a global financial institution. Its role has been threatened. Okay, and that's how the imbalances are going to create much more complex scenarios as far as India is concerned, as far as international political economy is concerned. The next point would be about the innovation. If one refers to the Global Innovation Index, energizing the world with innovation, that's a complete title of it. China is closing the global innovation gap with the US very fast. China in 2020 ranked 17th and the US ranked 6th. And since 2016, China has been in the top 25 group and has risen consistently in the global innovation ranking. That brings us to a question of made in China. I would call that most of us are in an illusionment if we say keep talking about manufacturing, pandemic, supplies chains, product chains, they are shifting, diversifying, and creating problems for China. But mind it, China has already climbed the next ladder. It is already dominating the value chains. It is already dominating the supply chains. And that has been a problem if we're talking India, which is the 6th largest economy in GDP terms, and trying to go further. And it is going to face problems from China directly. The next problem, I think that is where I'm going to conclude in next term. The so-called fascination of learning from China is good. It's acceptable. The so-called romanticization of Chinese economy, which has the equal demographic power, which has enough ecosystem, history of ecosystem with regard to India. There is a lot of beautiful pictures, a lot of us draw and say that, oh, China was here, we were here, we will be here when China was here. So anyway, we are following the footsteps. I mean, I want to wake all those up to a harsh reality that the Chinese are ready to sell everything to us. Chinese are trying to build economic cooperation with India. China wants India's help, BRICS Bank, AIIB, WTO, and whatnot, everything. But listen, one important thing, when there is a globalism, when Xi Jinping went to Davos a few years back, he says that solvent economic activities. I'm referring to the upstream activities. What is upstream activities? When there is a cooperation. Remember, Uma was talking about how few products have been licensed to Indian manufacturers from China, Russians, and we're producing it in India. Do we have the same licensing scheme from Chinese? Do we have an opportunity to learn the Chinese experience, how the manufacturing industry is mushroomed? Do we have an access to their cases, how they developed it? No. So this subjectivity to force relationship with India in economic realm is threatening, as far as India-China ties are concerned. So those are the broad two things I wanted to touch base as far as India-China challenges and choices are concerned. I would like to stop here because I think I have taken more than what I was supposed to speak for. I've spoken for more than 35 minutes. So over to the organizers. I'm open to question and answers, and any observations from any one of you, I'm ready and happy to answer them. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much, sir. I would also like to take this opportunity and thank all the guest speakers. It's indeed an honor for us to host all of you, where you all touched upon different issues related to global order in India, whether it was the global systems and nation states, India and EU, India and Russia, India and China. So thank you so much. We are now moving towards the most awaited Q&A, that is a question and answer sessions. And also, I would like to make this announcement that Dr. Meenal Mapuskar ma'am has posted the feedback link and participation certificate link into the chat box. Kindly fill that up so that you can download your e-certificate through it and also give your feedback for the same. I now invite Professor Dr. Harshad Bhosle sir for the question and answer sessions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Janvi. There are
Over to
a
you,
few
sir.
questions from the student. It was pleasure to listen to Arvind. He has touched some of the most important issues, which in fact many of us were not aware of. Being a China expert, he has completely given a very, very new perspective. So thank you, Arvind. Thanks a lot. There are a few questions from the student. They have written on personal WhatsApp group. This is a question to Arvind. What is the exact mantra? The students are asking a question. What is the exact mantra of not allowing the differences between India and China to grow into dispute?
Thanks, Arshad. You want me to take questions one by one, or you want to put a bunch of questions?
You can, no, there are very few questions, so you can directly respond to one question.
I think there is no mantra as such. See, the question is not letting turn into dispute. I think we already have disputes. The mantra should be actually how to deal the disputes effectively. I mean, anything with regard to India-China is concerned, right from economics, right from strategy. We are talking about a plethora of problem areas and areas which have not been resolved constructively over the period of last few decades. And I think both countries assume that the economic relationship, the growing interdependence would solve the problem. But I don't think that is an issue. With China, look at the Chinese size of interdependency we have built with the Chinese, and Chinese exports to India. But has that really turned into a mantra? That has not turned into a mantra. If Chinese want India not to be part of Quad, or Chinese do not want India to be friends with the West, and what China says, that if China assumes that's a mantra, I don't think that's even a mantra called here, right? The important thing is the effectiveness. And with the resolute mind, the Indian leadership tried to take China and understand China, right? And not to, I remember, I mentioned at one place actually, not to get lured away. If we believe in the strategic autonomy, I think that would be somewhere, that is something which is near to a mantra. I should not call a mantra. It's a rasayan actually. It's a chemistry which the Indians should learn. If we talk about strategic autonomy, good. I mean, we should talk about strategic autonomy. But strategic autonomy in the June of 2019, and we're forgetting in the August of 2019, and suddenly wake up in June of 2020. I think that's pity for all of us, isn't it? So I think that's my straightforward answer, Harshad.
Yeah, thank you very much, Arvind. Anyone would like to ask a question? They can unmute themselves and they can ask.
Sir, may I?
Yeah, Chandramohan Joshi, sir, please, from Economics Department.
Yeah, I think either Arvind sir to answer it or Jabin sir to answer it. and I hope I'm asking the right questions. Jabin sir brought about the comparative analysis of India China, but one thing what he touched was uh, the differences these two countries have in terms of technology, and that is what Arvind sir also talked about, innovations. So given our geopolitical position, I'm talking about India and China. uh, Dr. Singh once said, Manmohan Singh, that the world has enough space to accommodate both China and India. My first question is, do you agree to that? And second, in this multipolar world, the new emerging world where Dr. Nide also talked about breaking down of the global institutions, how effective are new global financial architecture, particularly with respect to uh, this BRICS Bank, New Development Bank, where recently there has been a news from China saying that India is an odd man out over here in BRICS and SCOs. So, sir, what is the way forward for India with respect to economic ties with China? Over.
Jabin, would you like to start or shall I go ahead?
I mean, I can just quickly answer one part of the question, and you can handle the economic side. Dr. Joshi, let me try and connect the technology and whether there is the technology aspect and whether there is space for both India and China. So while Dr. Manmohan Singh did make that statement about there being space for both India and China, and the Chinese have made rhetorical commitments to that, the fact of the matter is that in practice and also in terms of what China's own internal documents and speeches say, there really isn't any acceptance of such sharing of space with India or with anybody else for that matter. So China has actually decided that it has nothing, it is not interested in sharing space, that it wants to be number one, unquestioned number one. And that is a reality that we have to accept, both from a policy point of view as well as from an academic point of view. And look at just the use of technology by China. I mean, China is using technology that developed by democratic states, controlled and mediated by rules and regulations about civil rights and democracy, without any such control or regulations or respect for human rights or civil rights in China. Take facial recognition and the targeting of the Uyghur ethnic minority in China, in the Xinjiang province, or the targeting of other minorities such as Tibetans or Mongols. All of this with the help of what is known as grid surveillance systems, which make use of security cameras, facial recognitions, even now DNA sample collections, etc. So I think that is the reality that we are facing. India and China could work together, could share responsibilities and space if India and China were on the same plane as far as their political ideologies and aspiration, and not aspirations, but political ideologies and outlook, worldviews are concerned. But that is not the case. They have very differing worldviews, and that is the reality we must acknowledge and take into account. Thank you.
So I think I'll just want to add a few points to what Jabin said. And a question about space. Zoshi said the question is, let's talk in real terms. Okay, there is this world, there is this economy, there are certain amount of countries. So the producers have takers, and the takers would decide what they want, right? So it's a mechanism which has its own metabolism, right? Now, this has been shifting. There is changes with regard to this. to this give and take, making spaces in economic terms, in political terms, right? So the space is defined in units. Say call it 100 units. Over the period of last few decades, the Chinese have created, expanded their units in this global space. Now, yes, Dr. Manmohan Singh said correctly, there is enough space for both countries. So that means that India is also having its own space, maybe not as big as Chinese space or at the way it occupies space in global systems. Maybe we are somewhere about 5 units if China is running at as high as about 30, 35 units. I'm just trying to measure it, at a very, very mature level. But remember one thing, when India tries to increase its space by growing, that means that it has to shove somebody out, right? It's common sense, very common sense. You use any scientific theory, use any calculations. Shoving happens, displacement happens. And this displacement would happen at the cost of those economies and countries which are already rising, right? So it was China which displaced Japan west and emerged. If India has to rise, it has to shove, it has to displace the ASEAN, Southeast Asian economies, a little bit China, and a little bit, the Latin American countries. Are these countries ready to do that? China definitely is not ready to do that. China doesn't have enough tolerance to let India grow. So yes, on paper, Mr. Singh is correct, technically correct. Yes, enough space. If you are content and ready to live with that space. But if you want to expand that, there's a problem. That's the answer to your first question. Second question is about what is the way forward to the financial architecture to work with China? The genealogy, the way BRICS Bank has come into existence, right? The AIIB also. And in both these banks, China has a larger stake, in terms of its capital and its voting also, in AIIB also. BRICS Bank, it may not look, in BRICS Bank, it may look it's just 20% stake, capital stake every country has. But if you just flip the pages further and you look at the reserve currencies, China has 40% stakes in the reserve currencies. So it is imbalanced from the foundation. Now, why so? Because China wants to dominate any structure, any architecture it involves with. It believes in domination. If you try to do the lipid test of the Chinese, hierarchy and the strategic mind, they believe in hierarchy. It's a very straightforward hierarchical system. So, if India wants to cooperate with China, there has to be few terms very clearly put forward, and that's what we did in AIB. We did not want to lose an opportunity where we want to be part of investment infrastructure bank, where large of the loans are given to poor countries, developing countries, low-income countries, and India is doing it proudly. So I think there won't be any new mechanisms as such. I mean, NDB and AIB, I think this is the one. I think the world has learned enough to rectify the present global financial institutions and to take it forward, but not to create any more new. Nobody has so much of bandwidth to create new institutions. So let me take the word which the earlier audience or the earlier observer used, mantra. So mantra is basically there has to be clear clarity and ambiguity in terms of what are the give and takes, what are the cost benefits. India being part of any global financial institution is concerned. India has been feeding into the Chinese system, Chinese domination. I'm not good. There are a lot of things we can talk about. The spatial drawing rights, IMF. China used India because India is buying or holding the Chinese renminbi, which is one of the qualifying factor, China to be a global currency, right? So I think the present mantra, I would say that India has to be very clear about its priorities and a suitable game plan, how to pursue those. and not to have campaigns, sweet words, or romantification. I think we should avoid those things, and in clear-cut terms, need to understand that what are the challenges and need to solve them in an orderly way. Doshi sir, if I can have answered your question. Thank you
Yes,
so
sir.
much.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Arvind sir and Jabin sir. Thank you very much.
Harshit
Yeah.
sir, sorry to interrupt you into the middle.
Yeah.
May I just request the guest speakers to kindly start their video while they're answering the questions? Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now,
You may
yeah.
continue, sir.
Yes. Should I on my video, or I can speak in the same way?
Sir, it's fine.
Okay. So there are two questions from our MA student. He has asked two questions. One is addressed to Mudul sir, and second question is addressed to Uma. So first question: what are the exact systemic crises of current capitalist global system? This question is addressed to Mudul, and the next question, which is asked to Uma, is because of India's proximity with the United States of America, how it will affect India-Russia relation, especially Russia going closer to Pakistan.
Oh, shall I speak first? Hello.
Yes.
Nothing. I mean, basically, when I'm talking about the current systemic problems and systemic issues, what I'm talking about is the kind of uncertainty that we are all undergoing. Okay, not a major thing, but then when I was talking, I was very clear about one thing, that I'm talking about the capitalist global system, and this capitalist global system has brought in a very unequal society. And that's how I wanted to juxtapose the unequal societies, inequalities, poverty, all of those kind of things. I was trying to link to what Thomas Piketty is trying to say, and how and how the consumption levels are also, to some extent decreasing, and because of this, there's a global crisis which is bringing in some kind of insecurity amongst the nations. And that is what I feel is that is what I feel are the current systemic changes. And unless and until we do away with these kind of global capitalist systems, I think we will not be able to make a new structure. And therefore, in order to make these particular new structures, I feel I feel that there should be a more egalitarian society and egalitarian structures that should not only come at the state level, but also at the nation state level, where people are at par. See, basically what happens is, whenever we are talking about all these international relations, you will find that either we are talking about in the current situation, either we are talking about free trade, or we are talking about some kind of trade disputes, we are talking about or we are talking about some kind of boundary issues and borders and strategies and these kind of things. But what's happening is, I mean, how are we shaping the entire global society? These things are very important. Like, take for example some of these issues, okay, which we have been seeing in some of the countries. Like, let's take for example Myanmar, whatever is happening, or maybe in the US, the Black Lives Matter, these kind of things, when these kind of movements came in. I mean, these movements were transnational. I mean, especially the Black Lives Matter is a transnational movement which was seen in almost 40 countries of the globe. Okay, whereas it was a small little thing where a particular person was choked to death by a policeman, by a white policeman. But then these kind of, I mean, these are some of the what should I say, assertions towards systemic changes that people are looking for. And if you look at, again, Black Lives Matter, again, it is a matter of two different races. Okay, also about poverty. It's also about, because it all began with that $20 bill on which the entire issue was brought out, and then it became a transnational issue. Okay, the kind of agricultural or farm sector demonstrations that we see today in Delhi, tomorrow you will find these kind of demonstrations happening all across the globe. Okay, so what we are expecting, or what is expected is, I mean, should there be some kind of structural changes? Okay, not only in the the global structural changes should should we perceive of some kind of new structures that may come in. That is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
There is a question. Uma, can I ask a question, sub question? Just wait for a moment. Can we have a new egalitarian system without capitalism? That was a question to Mrudul. Can we have a new egalitarian system without capitalist system? That was asked by.
Yes, we can.
Good. Yeah, over to Uma.
Thank you for the question, but I think I'd already addressed this, but just in case you want more details, I think the Russians are unhappy about the fact that we are moving closer to the United States, particularly in terms of the defense imports from the United States. From a point where the Russians were the sole suppliers of arms to India, now we have diversified our imports basket, so to say. They're also unhappy about the Quad, or India's idea about the Quad. They feel that the Quad is essentially meant to counter the Chinese, and I think this whole idea about this concert of democracies, or the Quad being this group of democracies, is something that they don't, kind of subscribe to. The question about Pakistan, I think I had dealt with that as well. But you see, the main issue, or the main reason why the Russians are reaching out to Pakistan is because they see the Taliban as being part of the solution in Afghanistan, not necessarily only as being the problem. And that is where the divergence between India and Russia is. And also the Russians feel justified in reaching out to the Pakistanis because we are happily, reaching out to the Americans. So they say that, you don't expect loyalty from us when you yourself are not loyal to us. I mean, this is their point of view. So those are the dynamics at play in India's relations with the United States and Russia's relations with Pakistan. And I think, as an Indian, I don't think we can really expect the Russians to not reach out to the Pakistanis, because as far as the Russians are concerned, what is happening in Afghanistan is something that is very vital to them. It's part of their core interest because of the connection to Central Asia and extremism. So I hope that answers your questions.
Harshad, can I just explain a bit more? See, I mean,
yes, sir, yes.
Yeah, the question that you asked, I mean, is it possible to bring in an egalitarian society without capitalism? You find that the capitalism itself is changing a bit. I mean, when I was discussing about my own paper, I was trying to say that the capitalist economies, they are becoming, they have shown their welfare orientation during this particular COVID thing. Okay, and to some extent, I mean, this thing will continue for over a period of time. But there's one more very important thing that I think we should take into consideration, and that is, every ideology has got its lifespan, maybe about 50 to 70 years. And over the period of time, you find that there are a lot of changes, socioeconomic changes that come about, and these socioeconomic changes later on, later on become catalyst agents of restructuring the society. And I think that these particular social norms later on percolate to accept these things into the state system, and that's how you'll find that a new kind of structures will emerge. I mean, just one example that I'll give you, prior to the World War I. I mean, I was talking to you all about progressive regimes and how egalitarianism can come in. I mean, in Sweden, people were, only 20% of people were voters, and voters over there were, their vote share was based on the amount of property that they had. So maybe, let's say, X person has got 10 units of property, so he will have 5 votes, and if another person has got 100 units of property, he will have 50 votes. So it depended on that. But today, if you look at some of these countries, they are most egalitarian societies. Today, your one man, one vote, one value, those kind of things are also there in all of these kind of countries. So so structures change depending upon the ideologies, depending upon the kind of ideas that percolate and go into the social and political systems, and these particular ideas are accepted by the state systems also. That is that is my further explanation to what you had asked for. Thank you.
Next question is to Praksha. He has asked in Marathi, so let me translate it. What are the invisible driving forces that will driving forces between India, European Union and India partnership in coming years to further consolidate in post-COVID-19 situation? Question was in Marathi, I have just translated. Adrushya Shakti was the word which was used by our student.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so if I've understood the question correctly, it's what are the driving forces for EU-India partnership in the future, in the post-COVID world?
Yeah, he has asked what are invisible driving forces. We can't hear you, Praksha.
Sir, maybe there is some network issue with Praksha ma'am. Praksha ma'am, can you hear us? Sir, there seems to be a network issue with Praksha ma'am.
Okay, I think there is some network issue with Praksha. Can I ask next question? Then later on, Praksha can join. Honorable Chairperson.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, with permission of Chair.
Arjun, sorry.
No, I think we have lost connection with Praksha. Can I ask the next question?
Yeah, go for the next
Later
question.
on, she can join.
Yeah.
Yeah, next question is asked by our BA student. I think Sumit can answer to this question. Is it possible to develop some kind of system of human security rather than national security? So question is about human security.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. So he's asking something about human security, possibility of human security in a multipolar world.
Human security. Hello.
Question is addressed in this way. Can be human security a possibility in multipolar world instead of national security? It was asked in Marathi, I have translated.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so
Actually, here when we are talking about national securities, we are indirectly talking about the individuals in those nations. So when we are talking about national securities, we are talking about notions that nations carry with them, about the individuals that they care, about the individuals that they refer to. For example, when we are talking, when democracies talk about particular individual, for example, take Myanmar. So when the coup happened, various democracies took stand against it, and they made resolutions for that. But then there were other countries who were absent or who didn't took initiative towards it. Then one more example will be about the Yemen crisis that is going on. So there are democracies that are supporting Saudi Arabia over Yemen crisis, and there is Iran, which is supporting the Yemen's Houthis against the Saudi Arabia. So individual the difference between individual and national is very blur, or it's very grayish area where each country decides which individual in other country they need to support, they need to protect. So as such, we can't say black and white whether human securities will be what you can say replace national securities. National securities will always be important, as every nation will see its own interest. Per se, every nation can rather give importance to individual security as it suits their own interest. One more example for today I would like to give is about how India is dealing with China. So even when India has a lot of issues with China, India doesn't poke in various internal wrongdoings that have been going in China, or various internal matters that are going in China vis-a-vis the Uyghurs issue. India has never raised this point till now. Even after the Galwan, we haven't raised this issue, as we considered it as internal matter of China, and we expect same reciprocal what we can say actions from China when they talk about the Article 370 or other things that are going on in Kashmir. I hope I have answered the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Sumit. Now there are two questions which are asked by the same student, but I think it has been addressed to Arvind. He has already discussed, but please, Arvind, if you could again repeat those in a nutshell. The question is, what has been the exact difference between Doklam crisis and Galwan crisis? And second question, it was actually an expected question. Is banning Chinese product a good idea?
Okay. I'm in a picture motion. If you can see me, I'll be happy. Well, the first question, what's the difference between Galwan and Doklam? The casualties, the first difference. The second difference between the Doklam was speaking about the tri-junction, where the Bhutanese sovereignty question with regard to Bhutanese sovereignty was also in the picture. With the Galwan, there was no third country. It was straight India and China, and we had casualty on both sides. So that's a major difference. Also, Doklam did not force India to relook its China policy, but there is a discontinuum in India-China policy after Galwan. Major difference between the two things. Harshad, what was the second question? I forgot.
Second question, is banning Chinese product a good idea?
Oh, banning Chinese product is a good idea or not? I think if it serves your purpose, it's good. If it doesn't serve your purpose, it is not good. And if you want me to be very specific, those products which are absolutely hitting hard at the low-income Indian manufacturing units, if those are dumped underpriced, we should ban them. Second, if those are compromising the security issues, we should ban them. And third, importantly, if we can produce them, but we don't have the capacity, we should dump and see whether we can produce or not to increase the capacity or build the capabilities, because this would lead further in the long run to create India's ability to withstand pressures. Because if we over-depend on China, we are always over-dependent on China for whether those are the raw material for medicines are concerned, APIs are concerned, whether those are related to carbide products are concerned. Carbide products are widely used in the automobile industries. 80% of the carbide comes from China. If they don't send it, we won't be having, Tata won't be cutting the doors and putting them to the cars. So there will be doorless vehicles running on the Indian roads. So we need to look at the options, and I think banning wood is the best area basically because we try to look for alternatives. And so it's a good thing, if the banning helps you to increase your capabilities and to cut your dependencies and improve your efficiency. It's good for all of us.
Thank you very much, Arvind. I think Praksha is now available
yes,
for
sir. Praksha ma'am is
comment.
available. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, am I audible now? I'm sorry about my connectivity issues.
Yes, you're audible. Yes.
Yeah. So my question, I think there was one. So in terms of invisible driving force, I would have to say the China factor does come in. EU is currently at a stage where it is trying to strengthen itself as a strategic actor rather than merely economic actor. Such a case, it can do so only is, and in Asia, its major strategic partners are EU, India and China. So in recent years, last two to 3 years, there has been a lot of voices within the European Union, which has been going against China. So this could, and when this happens, it is possible that EU turns to India and for its partnership in Asia. So yeah, in terms of invisible driving forces, China could be a factor. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. Now, I think there are no questions from the student, but anyone if wish to ask, they can ask questions. Yes, Sumit, yeah. Yes,
actually, I would like to respond to a question about how when a student asks about the difference between Doklam and Galwan, if the time permits.
Yes.
Yeah. See, the very first the reason Doklam was by accident and Galwan was pre-planned. Why it was pre-planned, it had a chronology of things that went behind it. And there are certain achievements that China got and certain realities that India understood after Galwan. The very first thing why it was deliberate, because it is the thing started in 2019 itself, when in August, when 5th of August, the Home Minister was been asked whether India will go for Aksai Chin, and in Parliament he on record said that yes, India will go for Aksai Chin once 370 and other things have been done, and this something was this made Chinese cautious about India's intentions. And then in the Malappuram summit, I guess few of the what we can say televisions, newspapers did mention that the Chinese were seeking areas where they wanted a trilateral agreement or a trilateral treaty to come into existence, but India refuted from it. And slowly, steadily, various problems, issues took place, and that gave rise to Galwan. Now, what India realized, or what China achieved from Galwan, China, the one thing that China achieved was they made India to accept the LAC and not the Aksai Chin that we were talking about in the August 2019. They made India to accept the the current LAC that China has proposed, though there are differences of opinion on where the LAC lies, but more or less the LAC or the demarcation where the LAC lies has been accepted, has been notioned. Secondly, what China achieved is India's concentration has been diverted. Before this, India had a very good or focused a lot on the ocean and the littoral states. But after this problem, India has again once again started focusing on northern borders and its security and its threats that it will be facing from northern borders. So these two things have been is something that differentiates Galwan from Doklam. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, I think if anyone wish to ask a question with permission of chair, we can, because questions from students are now over. Yeah, Chandraman, you can simply unmute yourself and you can ask your question.
Hello. Sir, my question is general in nature and anybody could respond to you. A famous historian in India has recently said that though we have different forms of government, India and China, but India seems to be catching up with China, particularly with respect to political decision making. If anyone can validate this statement or make a comment on the same.
Yeah, maybe Jabin or Arvind, both of them are China scholars. They can.
I think Jabin can take it. I'm not sure if Jabin is not here. I can take the question. Well, Joshi sir, your question was that. Okay, I'm not being allowed to unmute. Jabin, it's
okay. Now it's happened now. Okay.
Okay.
Minal, hello.
Yeah, it's
Jabin is not able to unmute himself.
Yes, sir. Settings are changed.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm afraid I'm in a very weak internet area right now. So I'll just keep my video off and try to address this question. I think it's an important question. In fact, I sort of hinted at this when I mentioned in my presentation that India will have to decide what is the alternative that it offers if it tries to push its leadership of the world. How is it going to be different from the United States, and how is it going to be different from China? So what is happening right now is that I mean, so far we've all followed this idea that India is a democracy, and that this kind of democracy is there's only one kind of democracy, and that is a Western democracy. And India, despite the fact that it is a developing country, will eventually tend towards that Western model of democracy. What China's arrival on the scene has shown is that this is not the end of history. That this end of the Cold War or the fall of the Soviet Union did not necessarily mean that democracy won, but that there are alternative political models that developing countries can adopt, which is what the Chinese are trying to say, that their model, the Chinese development model of political authoritarianism and laissez-faire capitalist economic development, is also a model that developing countries can adopt. Now, the challenge for India is whether India can offer a third path, which is both, which allows for both democratic political accountability, true federalism, as well as, economic equity, and the fact that, democracy, as in the West, does not come at the cost of rising social and economic inequality. And, economic development in China doesn't come at the cost of political rights. So to an extent, India seems to have swung from that older Western-oriented democratic model to a more Chinese model. That is very much the case in point. You look at the way our laws on internet management is being applied, the way, the foreign minister says that it is not neither democracy nor autocracy, but hypocrisy, when he reacts to the way foreign international agencies are criticizing Indian democracy. And he says that essentially that nobody has the right to criticize India because of whatever reason, which is not true, which is not the way forward. India must be a big and open enough power to be able to accept criticism and be confident enough to deal with the criticism, which is a confidence that China, despite all its rising power status, simply does not have. And the United States is too sure of itself to even accept criticism in many ways, though there is an effort constantly to acknowledge that there is criticism as well. So that really is a challenge. And, it depends on the Indian political class as well as on the Indian people to see what is it that they want, whether they want to be always number two, following either China or the United States, or to strike a path of their own, where they will have the best of both systems in place. Thank you.
Question answer session is over. It's over to Jahnavi now. There are no more questions.
Okay, sir. Okay. Before moving towards the formal vote of thanks, I would request Dr. Mrudul Nire, sir, to give the chairperson's remark on today's webinar. Sir.
Oh, well, I don't know if I'm really qualified to be a chairman for this particular national webinar. However, I mean, just in a nutshell, we had very good discussions today, right from Sumit. Sumit also opening up with, what kind. I mean, taking the stock of the foreign policy trajectory of India to Uma Purushottam, who literally, concentrated on India, Russia, USSR, US. Okay, some of the divergence issues and some of the issues where there is some kind of collaboration, those kind of things. Of course, it's always nice to hear Praksha. Praksha, I know she specializes in Europe, and very pertinent points were brought about by her also. And lastly, we had Arvind, but I'm absolutely not qualified to speak anything on what Arvind says, because he's got a vast experience of knowing China for almost 20 years now. So I don't have much to to summarize. But then, and since we have had a lot of questions, also the questions were very pinpointed questions, and they really brought in new perspectives on India in the global scenario. With this, I think, and I think I should formally thank all the speakers, including the keynote speaker Jabin, and also the organizers. That's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I now request Professor Medha Dhapre, Madam, Head of Department Political Science, Kirti College, to give a formal vote of thanks.
Good afternoon and a namaskar to all of you. Am I audible? Am I audible? Hello? Yes? Okay.
Yes,
Yes, madam. You are.
Yes, madam. Yes, you're audible, madam.
Respected principal and the eminent speaker of this morning, I'm here to do the pleasant task of thanking to all those who have made this webinar a success. Initially, the department is thankful to our active and vibrant principal, Dr. D.V. Pawar, for his wholehearted and encouraging support for this webinar. We are also thankful to the DES for its motivating encouragement for this event. The illustrious stalwarts in the discipline of global politics, Dr. Jabin Jacob, Professor Mrudul Nire, Sumit Lokhande, Dr. Uma Purushottam, Praksha Chaitriman, Professor Arvind Yelari, who have articulated their treasure reflections on the theme of this webinar. And we are the Department of Political Science, Kirti College, and the Kirti College is extremely gratified to them. The IQSC has been a leading and guiding strength, and the department is obliged to the team IQSC and its captain, Professor Matthew, for their relentless support to this webinar. Otherwise, the webinar wouldn't have seen the success of this day. The faculty members, the research scholars, and the students who joined from various parts of India and maybe abroad as participants to this webinar, I am thankful to all of them not only participating, but asking very pertinent questions to the resource persons. I'm thankful to all the participants on behalf of the Department of Political Science, Kirti College, and our parent body, the Deccan Education Society. A very warm thanks to all of you, and Jai Hind and Jai Jagat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Rudurji, thank you. Rudur.
Sir,